So you've decided to learn more about the qualities of leadership. You know, a man who'd been in politics for just 3 years wrote in March 1950, "I'm keen on politics because," and he went on to explain an obsession that led him into the highest political position in Queensland. When Johannes Bjelke-Petersen became Premier on August the 8th, 1968, John Gorton was the Prime Minister of Australia, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the United States President, and Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain. Johannes was 57, an age at which most people have retired. Over nearly 20 years, he changed the state dramatically. And in fact, the effects of his leadership should include those he had on a whole nation. Now, whether you admire the man or not, this series of interviews with Sir Joh will help you understand how Johannes became a leader and why his leadership qualities kept him at the top for longer than Gorton, Baines Johnson or Wilson.
The early life of the Bjelke-Petersen family, carving out a lifestyle in the bush, was one of very great hardship and difficulty. Do you believe, Sir Joh, that those early days formulated a plan, a stereotype of a young man who was going to succeed at all costs?
I think it played a very big part in my following years as I grew older, as I experienced what it was like to be living under very, very difficult circumstances, very poor circumstances, because I had, yes, a brother who was mostly away at school while he was alive, and my sister who was much younger than myself, but then mainly my mother, because father was not well and could not do the work that otherwise a father and a husband would be able to do. So we had difficult circumstances. That's going back a long time too, well into the 70, 75, 76 years ago, when they started there in standing scrub, all timber everywhere, everywhere you looked. I can just remember a deal of that, and then it had to be chopped. No bulldozers in those days, and of course it was difficult.
Sure.
But it was a long period until you could get any income, till the scrub could be chopped and burnt and grass planted. And as we as other farmers had started, who were there a little earlier than we were, they were milking cows to, well, make some butter and to sell butter. There was nothing else you could do. There was no, you couldn't grow any grain to sell it because there was nobody to sell it to. And of course, in the very early years when Mother first came, there was no train, no Kingaroy. It's 150 miles inland, and so it was hard. But I think it was all good. I really do. I think to have to endure, to have to try, to strive, really sort of, well, bring something out of you. Then you learn later in life that if you try hard enough, you work hard enough, you strive hard enough, and plan thoroughly, carefully, and give everything great consideration, then you will succeed. And I think it's sort of one follows the other.
So, to succeed, does one have to have difficulty?
No, not necessarily, because I think there are a lot of people in life who don't have to experience difficulty, who've been grown up in a good home, where they've had an opportunity of going to school ordinarily, go to, well, the university, high school, whatever it might be, and that still succeed and succeed very, very well indeed. They do so much quicker, much easier, more easily than what perhaps in my case, because it was long, long years of building up very, very slowly, clearing land, starting to plough it, and then trying to sell maize that we grew in those days, which was very, very difficult. And I don't think people today would, you'd never get anybody to start off like we had to start off. But of course, we go back a generation, quite a long time, much longer than most people.
The motivation that kept you going and has kept you going for so long.
Yes.
Was it survival primarily, or was it a will to succeed, do you think?
Well, it was a matter of survival. I think that would be number one. We had to survive. We had to, well, grow our own produce or vegetables to live and succeed. And that was number one. And then, of course, we did want to, I did, as I grew up, I had one burning ambition, and that was to get out of the poverty in which I found myself, and which I, as a young lad and then as a young man, well, I don't think anybody's very happy in those circumstances, and I knew there was only one way you could do it. There was nobody else would do it for you. You had to do it yourself. You had to strive hard, work long hours, and in that way, well, it did play a part, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that people have got to go that road. They can do it, as I said, much easier.
Have you still got that motivation now?
Yes, I have. That's why I don't want to give in and go home, or as it were. I've all my life, or biggest part of my life, I've been doing things away from home, contracting, aerial spraying and bulldozing all over a big part of the state, and pioneered a lot of things, new avenues of doing things and ways of doing things. I guess it's why I wanted to do things like the space station, about Expo, when nobody else wanted it, nobody else said it was possible. And I had to convince my colleagues that Expo was going to be good. I couldn't understand why they couldn't see it. They said the cost would be too great. We wouldn't be able to do that. I said, well, we borrow the money. I started off at an early age too, through hire purchase. I always say to Australian Guarantee Corporation Company, I said, I would never be Premier if it hadn't been for you. You people, you loaned me money, a lot of money, to buy heavy equipment with in the mid-40s, when I didn't have the wherewithal to do it. And so I became well known. I ultimately was asked to stand for Parliament. So I say to these people, they have a good laugh about it when I join them for their annual dinner. But that's here in Brisbane, where I came as a very young lad, or young chap, and started that way when I went into the heavy earth-moving equipment. But these things are, well, it all adds up, and I think it's an advantage.
When you set out to do something, do you set yourself a goal?
Well, not so much a goal. I guess you do it step by step. I think I realized if I could get heavy equipment long before almost my time, because I had a job to get anybody to employ me, because they said you're charging too much for your equipment. It doesn't pay. I said it will pay. But while I had a goal there, I still also realized I had to go step by step. I had to start on one of our own properties and clear our own property. People came like that at a show to watch me. They had never seen a bulldozer at work, a big bulldozer, what it could do and couldn't do. And so it's a long process. You have an objective, yes, but I guess the main prime objective was to do things, useful things, and do it successfully, and improve your own financial position. I guess that was sort of one of the motives.
Fine. So in other words, the goal or the objective that you established and you set out to do, you set out to do in a certain pattern.
Yes.
What about the goals and or objectives that don't work out? For example, you had in mind, obviously, an objective was to retire from politics as the Queensland Premier on the 8th of August 1988. That hasn't happened. How do you cope with that situation?
Well, it didn't happen simply because I had some people that I couldn't trust. I trusted them, and I got caught out because they are people you can't trust, a certain percentage of them. And that's why that went that way. Well, I coped with it just as anybody else would have to cope with it. I naturally resigned, as you indicated, and I've been doing other things in the meantime, watching from the sidelines the people trying to cope, who thought they could cope but are not making what I'd say a very good job of it, Richard.
So do you believe, for example, then when you're setting your objective, you've got to be fairly flexible?
Well, you've got to be flexible to a degree. You have to, well, perhaps change your system of doing things. For example, when I started aerial spraying, I was the first one in Queensland. I spent an awful lot of money. We lost 16 aeroplanes in the 11 years we were crop spraying and seeding. I wanted to do crop spraying and seeding right from the word go. I found that I had to start first to educate people that you could do these things with an aeroplane. They didn't believe that I could do these things. And so I had to first of all educate them to the aerial spraying of the different diseases, the different weeds, and that took a number of years. Then I said to them, I can also do seeding for you. I can sow your seed for you by aeroplane. I can do it for much cheaper. So, which I did. We sprayed hundreds of thousands of acres, sowed hundreds of thousands of acres seed. I had to divert and be flexible there and only do part of what I wanted to do originally. And that took years. I was doing that for about 11 years. And so, yes, you have to be flexible at times.
One of the qualities you've mentioned to me in the past about being successful is the ability to discipline yourself. What do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I guess to discipline yourself, you have to forego a lot of things. And if you take just in the area of politics, I had disciplined myself, though perhaps I'd already done so in my contracting, through my contracting work of being away from home a lot. I had to, in the political arena, I had to leave my family, as it were, on the sidelines. I couldn't work for them. I couldn't do the things for them I wanted to do. And Flo had to largely bring up our children. And in that way, I had to discipline myself that if I was in politics, I had to be away from home. I had to be at Cape York. I had to be at Mount Isa the weekend or during the week. I could not go home. And that takes a lot of discipline. And I find a lot of members of Parliament are not able to cope with that point. And they haven't got wives who will be acceptable or accept that position. I was fortunate in Flo that she accepted that position. I was a member of Parliament 5 years before I met Flo, but and so she knew what it was all about. But you have to discipline yourself quite a lot in a whole lot of different ways. And first of all, I guess you've got to dedicate yourself to the work 100%. And I put long hours in, exceedingly long hours in, and disciplined myself to work hard. It would be easier to go to sport on a Saturday or during the week. I never did, because I had one objective, and that was to serve the people of this state. And I disciplined myself that way to just concentrate on doing that job and doing it to the best of my capacity, together with my colleagues, because it was a team effort.
You've always been known as a one-man band as far as decision-making is concerned. Surely decisions that are made that affect people's lives should be done on a consensus basis.
Well, I guess to an extent you may be correct, but on the other hand, you take all how I changed people's lives. Before I started pulling brigalow scrub, and I was the first one by many years to start pulling that huge belt of millions of acres from here to Blackall, that huge belt of brigalow scrub. Previous to that, the grazier had to go around each little tree, and there was about 1,000 in every acre, and try and ring bark and hoping it would die. And they had a tremendous problem. I changed their whole lifestyle. I came in with bulldozers and pulled hundreds of acres every day, and started a process that ended up in opening up millions of acres. But I didn't have to have consent. I changed their lifestyle with aerial spraying too. I changed the whole concept of their living and their conditions. And I didn't have to sit down and say, do you agree to this? Do you want this? I went out and did it. I said, here I am. I have big bulldozers. I have huge anchor chains, so heavy you can hardly lift up one link off the ground. And we did that in many parts of Queensland, Billowheeler, all up through the centre, out west. We had machines. I had machines working, and changed their lifestyle, but no consensus. Joh Bjelke-Petersen had the vision and the initiative and started it, and it took on ultimately.
But you had to get their agreement to do it.
Well, yes, and most of them I couldn't cope with. There were so many wanted it. It wasn't a matter of getting the agreement. They wanted me. I couldn't cope with it all. But and same in the political arena. If you're a leader, you've got to give a lead, because there are not very, particularly in my position as Premier, I know people say I did things and so on, I should have sat down and talked about it, then a lot of them wouldn't have got done. Expo wouldn't have been here. The space station wouldn't be here. The coal deals that they did, $500 million worth signed, you know, just after I left, that we set up, and there are others over there. They would never have happened if we had to sit down and talk about them, because there are so many people in this life, in government, in the National Party, who haven't the vision or the capacity, whatever you like to describe it, to see the possibilities, the end results. I guess some of us have an ability to see the end results. And I did, as I said, in that opening up of that vast tract of land, I could see the end results, and that motivated me to spend large sums of money to shift huge equipment out west. And I did it first of all on the basis, if you didn't want and didn't like what I did when I kicked off, I'd shift all my equipment away again, and you don't need to pay me. And I did that a number of times in different areas. I said, all right, I'll bring my equipment in. It'll cost me many, many hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds. And if you don't want to, I'll give you a day's work or 2 days' work. If you don't like it, I'll shift it away. Now, I believe that it could be done, and they would be satisfied. And I achieved a lot that way. The same with the, Expo and the others, the space station. I put it together. I said to them, this is what will happen and how it'll happen. And we got a degree of support.
But to make that sort of decision, you've got to really believe in yourself.
Well, to an extent you've got to believe in yourself, but you have to believe that the objective is a worthy one, that it ought to be, that it should be, and that it can be achieved, and it should be achieved. Now, Kane had the Premier Victoria, he had, I think, for 6 months, the possibility of having Expo. And then he said, no, it's too big for me. And then he gave Mr. Fraser, who was the Prime Minister, offered it to Mr. Rand. And we waited many, many months to hear his decision, and he couldn't make a decision. I suppose they thought the BLF, you know, wouldn't let them build it. So then Mr. Fraser rang me up one night late about 11 o'clock. I remember it well. He said, Joe, Mr. Rand, or Neville, has just told me he won't pick up Expo. He doesn't want it. Will you take it? I said, yes, I'll take it, instantly, without any thought or consideration.
But how can you make an instant decision like that with a major project affecting people's lives, money, state money and so forth? You must believe in yourself.
For me, yes, you do. You have to believe in yourself, but I had to believe in the project. I knew that ultimately people would accept. I saw it at the Commonwealth Games. We ran the Commonwealth Games, and you went over exceedingly well. And that, again, was a big effort, and it takes a lot of thought, a lot of organisation. And we put a lot into Expo, but I was convinced. To me, it was so simple, that it would be a success. And it would be great for Queensland and great publicity around the world. And I saw that, and we went with it. I went with it. My cabinet colleagues ultimately, I say yes, ultimately agreed.
Going back to the leadership issue, it was simple for you to make the decision, yet it wasn't simple for Rand or Kane to do it.
No.
What was the difference?
Well, the difference was, I guess, they didn't have confidence in their ability or their state or their capacity to organise it, how to go about it, or, as I said before, whether it was the BLF, the Building Workers People Federation, whether they wouldn't, you know, just like they did with the big Parliament House. It was to cost $300 million. It cost $1,300 million because the BLF gummed up the situation so often. I knew that they wouldn't gum it up here because, well, I wouldn't let them. Simple as that.
So it really was an easy decision for you to make?
Very easy, no difficulty at all. Never had one ounce or one moment of worry about the whole thing right from the word go. I knew that we had a capacity to borrow money overseas. I knew we didn't have to touch our own money. We could borrow it overseas because Queensland had a high rating. When we started as a government, we were known as the Cinderella state of Australia. Queensland was despised, looked down upon from an investment point of view and so on. And from when Frank took over, Frank Nicklin and his government in '57, of which I was part of the team, it gradually changed. And today, of course, we are very high rating in the eyes of the world as a good place in which to invest.
But your decision-making is not always that quick. What process do you go through to, say, problem solve or make a decision? Do you analyse and so forth?
Well, naturally, one has to consider very carefully. On the space station in Cape York, Sir Sidney Schubert and myself, I discussed the pros and cons with him. I suggested to him that he was to get in a team of, say, half a dozen of scientists who are specialised or specialists in the field of space travel and so on, which he did. I spoke to them, and in that period we had a process. And when I walked out of the room after they had been with us, then I was firmly convinced that the process was a good one, or the concept was a good one, and that it would take on. And some of my colleagues said to me they thought it was pie in the sky, and I just smiled to myself. And when it was all acknowledged, and we had 60 applications of huge world organisations wanting to pick it up, they said to me in that one of the last cabinet meetings I had, they wished they'd had the faith I had, and they never for a moment believed that it could ever happen. But that's lack of vision.
Do you think, Sir Joh, pardon me, do you think, Sir Joh, that in fact the vision, the faith, and getting back to yourself again is really what makes it happen, rather than the analytical aspects of looking at the problem, seeing it through, seeing the pros and cons and so forth? Do you really still think, though, it's the vision ultimately, the belief in your own decision-making process that really carries it?
Well, I am only an ordinary man, and when you say to believe in yourself and your vision and so on, you have to have a faith, yes, sure. I'm one of those who, too, of course, one of the extraordinary, I suppose, comparatively few, who believe that there is a chance or possibility to seek God's blessing and guidance, His forgiveness, which I do every day of my life, have done all my life, still do, in the process of things. I accept what comes and goes as part of, well, perhaps what ought to be or should be. That's one of my prime motivating forces, that you do what you think you should do, believing that, well, the way is opening up, or the way won't open up, or whatever. And you have a very strong conviction and faith that way, that if you haven't got that, well, then I think you miss, or people miss quite a lot in many respects. There are many people who do big things and outstanding things without that, and who have tremendous confidence in themselves. But in the ultimate, I think they've missed a lot.
Do you have any concern ever that you may fail? In other words, has the fear of failure ever come?
No. I have never feared failure in that sense. I've always believed if you do your best and things don't work out quite the way you expected them to work out, I never quite look upon that as failure. When I, for example, did some of these things that I did and spent a lot of my own money in those early, far off, over 40 years ago, all these things happened I told you of a moment ago, I wouldn't have thought of it as failure if the whole idea or concept of pulling Brigalow Scrub down with 2 days each out of sight of each other in the timber, pulling 4 or 5 chains of timber down in one go. I had people coming for hundreds of miles like a show. The whole roads were blocked up with people coming to watch this phenomenal event of how the whole concept of living and developing the country had changed by Joh Bjelke-Petersen and his idea. But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have looked upon that as failure at all. No, you never worry about failure, you keep moving ahead. I've always, too, Richard, had a very interesting part of my life is to read the autobiographies of famous men. I have quite a number of books at home. The first Henry Ford's book, My Life and My Work and My Life, by Henry Ford. The first Henry Ford. And it's very, very interesting. I have many of those sorts of books, and they motivate me, and as I see the principles under which they have started off and worked, and the way they've recorded their thoughts. For example, Ford, you have to be faithful in little things to be master over many things. And there are a lot of these general ideals and objectives that they have. I could tell you a lot about that too, if I had the time.
Yes, sure. Sir Joh, but surely everything you've done couldn't have been totally successful. Let's get back and just touch briefly on this not necessarily the fear of failure, but perhaps the fact that some things don't work out the way you want them to, and some things are less than satisfactorily worked out. How do you come to grips with those things?
Tell me one, for example.
Well, I quoted earlier on the 8th of August 1988. I mean, you've mentioned obviously enough that you weren't totally in control there, that other forces were around. But surely there must have been immense disappointment, and perhaps as you walked out of your office for the last time, you must have surely felt that you didn't achieve what you set out to do.
No, not really, not really. I walked out of the office feeling very sad that the men that I had trusted, the men that I thought that I could bank on in our organisation of that place up on the hill, and my colleagues, I thought that I could trust them. Then when I found that I couldn't trust them, that they'd changed direction of the party and policy, I was sad about that. To think that after 40 years and the immense effort I'd put into it, many of them naturally wouldn't have been there without the support, that direction I'd given. These are the things, of course, you've got to accept. But again, I don't know that these are decisions that sort of I made that didn't eventuate.
So you could justify it then by saying, well, I really wasn't in control, they manipulated me, so therefore I can walk away from it and say I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve.
Well, they didn't manipulate me. They manipulated themselves and the organisation, the party, and they made fools of themselves, and they've destroyed themselves, and largely the party, as we'll see as time goes along. You can't go do those things and go down the road they're going and then expect people to support and continue. That's unfortunate for them and for the party and the organisation.
I'd like to just touch on one point which we discussed previously. How do you actually learn to discipline yourself? We talked about discipline before. How do you actually get to grips with disciplining yourself? And in essence, who really showed you how to do that?
Well, it wasn't a matter of it's sort of, I think, something that comes by degrees, disciplining yourself. First, when we were children, we weren't able to, well, there was no opportunity to do things or go places, and like young people do today, or watch TV or whatever it might be. We had to be disciplined or recognize the fact that we had to work, that we had to help 101 little ways to our parents to try and overcome the problem that we were living in. We had, yes, that was disciplining yourself to a degree. I think it comes by degree. It's not something that sort of happens all of a sudden like a bolt from the blue or a flash of lightning. You do it by degrees, and your parents are the guiding forces that help to discipline you in the first place. And much more of that should happen today by parents as far as their children are concerned. I'm sure about that as I move around and see what happens.
Thank you, Sir Joh, very much indeed. Thank you.
The first tape in this series with Sir Joh has dealt with his early family hardship and its impact on his style of leadership. And it seems that those difficulties motivated Sir Joh to be more successful in everything he did. However, he doesn't believe that hardship is a prerequisite to being a successful leader. Sir Joh says that because his early life was a frugal one and involved going without, he was able to discipline himself into not missing what many believed were necessities. And he says his mother played a vital role in teaching him the art of discipline, not by punishment, but by teaching him its value. Sir Joh has always set himself goals, but they were goals that he thought he could achieve. The process of setting those targets firstly involved visualizing their successful completion. In other words, he planned ahead and he progressed towards his goal step by step. Now, although Sir Joh has admitted some of his plans weren't realised, for example his retirement date, he doesn't believe in dwelling on that fact. He never fears failure, and he seems to never even consider the prospect. Flexibility also plays a part in Sir Joh's consideration of successful leadership. He believes plans may need to be amended at times to meet changing requirements, but he says flexibility is paramount in bringing plans or goals to a successful conclusion. Listening to the advice of others and even taking note of dissension is important to Sir Joh, but he says a good leader must always make the final decision. He says if you have vision and faith in your own decisions, you can and you should take the lead. In conclusion, Sir Joh acknowledges the importance of reading about other successful leaders and applying what he's learnt to himself. Discipline, the setting of goals, an analytical decision-making ability, flexibility and courage. These describe what Sir Joh believes are the characteristics of all great leaders. So you've decided to learn more about the qualities of leadership. You know, a man who'd been in politics for just 3 years wrote in March 1950, "I'm keen on politics because," and he went on to explain an obsession that led him into the highest political position in Queensland. When Joh Bjelke-Petersen became Premier on August the 8th, 1968, John Gorton was the Prime Minister of Australia, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the United States President, and Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain. Johannes was 57, an age at which most people have retired. Over nearly 20 years, he changed the state dramatically. And in fact, the effects of his leadership should include those he had on a whole nation. Now, whether you admire the man or not, this series of interviews with Sir Joh will help you understand how Johannes became a leader and why his leadership qualities kept him at the top for longer than Gorton, Baines-Johnson or Wilson.
Sir Joh, a few minutes ago we were talking about failure.
Yes.
And obviously enough, one of the regrettable things, perhaps from your point of view in your career, was that your Joh for PM campaign didn't succeed the way you would have liked it to have done. And obviously enough, there were a lot of people involved in there that perhaps could have been part of that failure. But nevertheless, you were the leader.
Yes.
So therefore, presumably you must accept part of the factor that the exercise didn't succeed the way you wanted it to do. How do you accept that?
Well, that's not difficult to accept, or to. It's better to have loved and lost than never loved at all. It's better to have tried and not succeeded than never to have tried at all. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we were, first of all, 12 months ahead of our time. People weren't quite ready for it. They still loved paying taxes. They still said we'd far rather pay high taxes than low taxes. We spent an awful lot of time and money over the last 18 months putting together a low tax policy and starting an entirely new concept of government in different ways. No need to go into that at this point of time. Now, I think the people of Australia lost an enormous opportunity because they thought, well, the Prime Minister, he could still continue to make them feel happy. Today they realise they're being taxed more and more, and life is getting more difficult, much more difficult, as the years go by. But there are not only the factors relating to myself, perhaps, that caused the change of policy towards the end, when we had to step aside. There were the factor that others came into the picture. While it was a Joh crusade in the first 3 months, it went like a house on fire. Tremendous support all over Australia. I had candidates in every seat in Western Australia, in South Australia, the Northern Territory, and started in Victoria. And then Sir Robert Sparks and the organisation came in and said, we'll make it official. It'll be an official campaign by the organisation. From that day on, it then became, or looked upon by many people, as a takeover by the National Party of the Liberal Party and the whole thing. And because of that, it came to a sudden stop, as if there'd been a big wall placed in front of us. People no longer responded as they had done prior to that, to my travelling around Australia and the campaign that I had waged. And indeed, the people that were going to stand with me, they pulled back. And the people who were going to fund us pulled back. They did not want to take over by the National Party led by Sir Robert Sparks. Very simple. And that's what went wrong. And that part of it, yes, I regret. I regret that I even agreed to let them come in. That I should have gone ahead on my own and put together our own team outside the National Party or with the National Party, but Joh candidates.
So perhaps you would say then that part of the problem was that there was some ill conception, and there was perhaps also some poor planning. Surely as a successful leader you can't allow poor planning or indeed ill conception.
I was one of those who tried to work together with the organisation in those days. And therefore when they responded to the success that I had already achieved to a remarkable degree, the response from the people, then I naturally said if they wanted to come in and make it official, as they termed it, then I go along with it on that basis. But that was something that, looking back on, if I had my chance over again, I said, no, thank you, I don't want to see you anymore. Let me continue this campaign the way I'm doing it. Let's put it together the way we're doing it. We would raise the funds without the party, quite simply and easily, and but much better than with the party, and so on. But that's all history, and I'm not wasting any sleep over it. I just feel sorry that this nation had an opportunity of trying an entirely new system, and a system that would make life much easier and present much greater opportunity. Today, they know very well that they are being ground into the ground, as it were, with heavy taxes and high costs, and I don't know where the end will come. It's not what it seems at the moment. There are exceedingly trying times for many people, and for primary producers, I think especially. They are having an awful time, exceedingly difficult time.
Surely during your career with the dramas and the ups and downs that you've experienced, there must have been times when you would have privately thought to yourself, oh, look, it's all too hard, let's give it up. I'm taking, for example, when you had immense pressure on you during the Sequeb dispute and so forth. There must have been times, surely, Sir Joh, you're a human being.
No.
There must have been times when you said, look, let's ease up.
No. I think you've got it wrong, really, because when things get tough, that's when I, perhaps sharpen up or really get keyed up to overcome the problem. I never at any time, I was the motivating force that kept the thrust going forward to oppose that strike. Every week I had in, I suppose, 20, 30 of men from the legal section, from outside legal people and their own Crown Law Office, of course. They were key people, and then people from the different departments, Ivan Gibbs and Vince Lester, they and their people. And I was the one that had to say to you, we will not give in. We are going to overcome this problem that we've got. These people must not be allowed to continue to hold us to ransom, where they hurt a lot of people so that a few, as it were, can gain some benefit. And no, there was no ever any wish or desire to give in and to sort of say, enough's enough, let's go home and take it easy. No way.
Because you're such a strong man in yourself, not everyone is the same. Are you forgiving, perhaps, or indeed understanding of people who do wish to give up, and in fact who do give up? Can you understand that? Can you accommodate that? Can you...
Well, I find very hard sometimes to accept that philosophy. It's not easy to bear fools who you have to half carry, as it were, along the way. Then you feel that you ought to have other people to take their place. But I think that's just common to everybody. I expected everyone, and by and large my cabinet was very good. They said, in effect, Joh, well, if you think you can handle it like that, you just keep going. And I just reported to them regularly, and perhaps once during the week in the cabinet on Monday, what was happening and what I believed. And there again, some of them said to me, we wished we had your faith. We wished we could believe like you believe, that you can overcome this problem. And so in that context, over the years, because of the success that we'd had right back in the Springbok days, tour days, and many other occasions, they accepted the fact that to leave it, well, to me to do the front running.
But you still had the team behind you.
Oh yes, they were behind. They accepted that fact. Though I think sometimes I wished I would have given in on the railway strike and many other occasions that we saw as successful. It's interesting that we had reached a stage here in this state when there was no such thing really as strikes of that were hitting all the other states. We never had a railway strike for many years. We never had a petrol strike when all the other people were lining up for a little bit of petrol, get a few cupfuls every day. Again and again, the rail strikes down south. We didn't have these. Or all the massive building hold-ups and strikes. We didn't have those here in this state.
Why do you think that was?
Well, simply because we adopted a firm attitude and a firm policy. And all we wanted to do was to make it easy and better for people to live. And we also wanted to make one law for everybody. There's not two laws where you can break and defy the law, like they wanted to march down Queen Street against the traffic at knock-off time. There's no two laws. There was never any two laws in this state, one for you and one for me. I couldn't even do those sort of things. And I said everybody abides by the same law. That should apply to the Aboriginal people section of the community today. All this talk about two nations and having a treaty, the most dangerous and desperate things that you could ever think of. That will lead to bloodshed in this country without any doubt at all in my mind. Once you go down that step, we've gone far too far even now on this land rights business, because it never stops. Then they want the treaty. Then they want the government funded by the government. You can read it all in the paper today. Exactly that they demanded. And some government somewhere along the line has to stop it. And I support John Howard very strongly in his stand against this treaty business that the Prime Minister is trying to foster on the people of this nation. Very dangerous, very bad. And I support him. Do you know what? the only thing is, of course, I say, John Howard and Ian Sinclair, why did you allow Fraser and Ian and Doug Anthony to start the fire going? They kicked the fire off. My word, they did. And now they are wanting to put the fire out. And they were having a big battle, and so is the rest of Australia. It's going to be very, very serious.
If I can just touch back, because just listening to you talking about the issues that you've discussed, it could be argued that whilst you said earlier on in our discussions that you had to remain sometimes flexible in your decision-making, if you get to a situation in the influencing a decision that you're about to make, it appears to me that there's very little inflexibility as far as Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen is concerned. In other words, you pretty much stand on your issue, that once a decision has been made by you, that's it.
Well, somebody had to make that type of decision. That's why Queensland went ahead like it has gone ahead. Why we've had all these massive and big buildings, and why people came here rather than going to other states to do their investment in so many, many ways, unbelievably so. First, I abolished death duties and gift duties. I forced that on the rest of the state of Australia. And now people today are voting for a Labor government to bring it in through capital gains tax. Why? I can never work it out why people vote for governments who do these sort of things. We abolished it here, and we forced every state in Australia, including the Commonwealth, to abolish death duties and gift duties. And we never imposed a lot of taxes that the other states have got. And we made it easier to live. And we lived within our means, and we had a balanced budget. Now, all these things over the years added up to a point where somebody had to make decisions and stick with them. And if I didn't stick with them, if I allowed, like, the abolition of death duties and gift duties, caused an awful uproar in the party. Sir Gordon Chalk fought me bitterly in Cabinet and at a party meeting that we had to call. And all I said to the members of Parliament that day, Sir Gordon spoke very, very strongly at the party meeting, marshalled his facts very, very carefully and fully, as he always did on any subject. He said, are you prepared to forego that school? Are you prepared to forego that road? Are you prepared to forego that courthouse in your electorate? Which you'll have to do if the Premier gets his way, and that was me, of abolishing death duties and gift duties. And all I said to the party meeting after he'd spoken for an hour or more on this vein, I said, I tell you what, gentlemen, there were no ladies in the Parliament then, I'll promise you one thing. Any of you who supports Sir Gordon's concept of continuing death duties and gift duties, I will make sure that you've got a nice advertisement in the front page of your local paper saying that you support the retention of death duties and gift duties. And you know, when the vote went up, there was only then one other than Sir Gordon. Two votes came up, Sir Gordon and another Liberal member who voted for the retention of death duties and gift duties. And the one member, of course, he was defeated the next election. But this is how you have to maintain that you are right, because subsequent events proved that within a few years we got much, much more money back than the death duties ever. The tens and tens of millions that we had to forego, we got it back in stamp duty in the buying and selling of land, particularly on the Gold Coast. And so you see, you have to have a vision, you have to be determined, you have to override people for their own good, because that's what ultimately happened on many of these things that we did.
But on the basis of you making the right decision?
Yes, of course, and it was the right decision. And I've yet to find somebody to tell me what the wrong decision was we made that wasn't in the interest of the people of this state. I know, though, the only one that I can think of, Richard, I can think of one, I didn't watch my back closely enough towards the end of my career because I trusted my colleagues. I now know that I can't trust them or couldn't trust them.
Right. As a leader, you've been criticised for being influenced in your decision-making by what has been commonly called in the media the kitchen cabinet.
Yeah.
How do you answer those criticisms?
I think they refer, first of all, to the years, all the years. I had one sister, Nita, who was very close to me, and we made decisions together. We formed Joh Bjelke-Petersen, a company that did all the aerial spraying and seeding and contracting with heavy equipment. Nita was in charge of our books and paying of wages and all the equipment and spare parts and so on. But we did it all together. And I had a wonderful mother who would, whether I came home at midnight or 12 o'clock at night, was always ready with an evening meal for me, which happened many times. And if I had to leave it long before daylight in the morning, I had a mother who always got up and had breakfast for me before I left, long before it was daylight. And so in this concept, I was very close to my mother and to my sister, and they to me. And my sister's still alive, lives out west. And now, of course, with Florence, we lived and worked that way. And I suppose with one or two others, you can say that people may have got that idea that it's a kitchen cabinet. And there have been a number of people that have played a big part in helping me in different ways. The part and role they played in government, Beryl Young and others that have played a very, very important role, a very helpful role.
But do you think that people like Beryl and others who've been mentioned should necessarily have access to advising you, giving you advice on political issues, perhaps to the detriment of your own cabinet colleagues, which is one of the accusations that has been made?
My cabinet colleagues, they sometimes make statements on issues that they're not fully, knowledgeable on. And on this one that referred to more lately the dismissal of 2 or 3 or 4 ministers. No, that is quite wrong, the assumptions I've made in that regard. I make the final decision and I make my own decisions largely, and I have had to do that over the years. But you have to, I find it always, and much more so than people realise, Bob Carter, my security man that goes with me. He's been with me 10 years. We walk together, we talk together, he puts me to bed every night, so to speak. I often bounce things off Bob, off my driver, off my pilot, off my secretary and press secretary. I get their reaction. And in that small group, and I think I could say Sir Sidney Schubert, and to a slightly lesser degree Sir Leo Hilscher, they were the small group with whom I, bounced things off and made decisions. The two officers those two officers that I just mentioned, they to a much lesser degree than the rest of them.
So how much do you think a leader should rely on advice from friends as against, say, official people in official capacity? Well,
Florence, for example, travelled the state a lot with me as Premier, and she, I think, has had a very, very big input into lots of the things that we do, sometimes not agreeing with what I wanted to do. But Flo is the person that I would say I'd 1,000 times rather have with me in a campaigning than anybody else, ministers or anybody. She has a far greater depth and ability to influence people and win people than anybody I've ever worked with from in the political field. And so Florence had a big input in the way I said things or did things. And indeed, I think you've got to get someone to bounce things off. I've always been a great believer in just bouncing them off people. And this is what I did do in so many ways with those around me on a day-to-day basis. My secretary and others that lived with me.
But the final decision comes back to you.
The final decision came to me. But I have always been a great believer in that just one point, much more than other people. What do you think? If I did that and said so and so, they might come up with a suggestion. I suppose in all the 17, 18 years that I flew with Beryl Young, we bounced a lot of questions off and got a lot of reactions. They're intelligent people, very intelligent people, the ones I refer to. And I think they're, I would say above average, and particularly in the political arena, had a very good insight. And as I said, Flo was outstanding. And that's been proved by the fact that here in this state, on a straight-out vote, no electoral boundary or rigging of boundaries or anything, where we have a vote across the state, Flo gets the enormous votes she does and brings in 4, and with the help of the 3 others, they have 4 senators elected. The Liberals 2, far better than any other state.
We're talking about Lady Florence. Obviously, you've been married for
36 years.
36 years, a very fine marriage. However, you're both strong people.
Yes.
She must disagree with you at times.
Yes, she does.
And indeed, your colleagues and cabinet colleagues and other people that have worked with you over the years also, no doubt, would have disagreed with you at times. How do you go about solving disagreements, conflict resolution and the like? What's the process?
In Flo's respect, Flo is, yes, very, very able, very strong, very pleasant, very nice. There are times, yes. I never try and force my will on Florence in that sense, or she on me. we have a agreement. She said, well, if that's the way you think you want to go, you ought to go that way. And so in a similar way, when she said to me, I'm not going to fly with you anymore, pushing parts out of an aeroplane like I used to get her to do in the early days, I never argued with her. See, in the days when we were in the Labor Party, you weren't allowed to cart any of your own things in your own vehicles. You had to put it on the train. You owned the railways, and that meant that you'd have to wait a fortnight or 3 weeks before they got to the destination where a lot of our plant was working.
Sure.
And so I used to take off very early in the morning, and we'd set out on a long hike of 3-4 hour flight out to where the machines were, and Florence's job was to open the door when I flew low and slowly as I could over the campsite and push the door open with her shoulder against the wind and slide these big heavy parts out. And then she came the day, she said, I will not do that anymore. It's too risky and I don't like it. I said, okay, and then I got somebody else. So we agreed to disagree.
But when you disagree,
Yeah.
and the issue is important for you and perhaps important for her,
Yeah.
or indeed when you're facing a situation in cabinet, or as you were, where there's an important issue that you believe in and that you know you're right, and you have a cabinet colleague that says, no, I don't agree, we shouldn't do it, and so forth, how do you then start to influence people, or do you just become immovable and say, we're going to do it and that's it?
Well, I guess in my case, Richard, because of my long years in politics, many times, most of them, they're only babes in the wood by comparison with the over 40 years that I had in politics. And Frank Nicholson used me quite a lot in his day because I was the only one who flew an aeroplane and sent me out to do many jobs around the state, to represent him and to launch candidates and all the many things that had to be done, because he didn't fly and there were no services much in those early days. And so, Joe, will you go? And I always said yes. Never once said no. All at my own expense, and travel the state. I could tell you many interesting stories on that regard. And so we got to that point, and the question you asked was...
Conflict resolution, how do you...
Yes.
Do you stand firm?
Well, I was going to say, yes, you do stand firm when some of your ministers or others say that is not right or that's not good. I say to them, well, this is where you're wrong in your argument. I seek to convince them. Often, I guess I couldn't convince them. I don't think I could have convinced if I'd have sat there and said, well, does everybody agree on the, say, Expo? I would never have had Expo, or the space station, or the coal deals, because most of them would not have agreed that these were good things to do. And I had to make a decision. And by virtue, that's the point, by virtue of my long years there in government, the background experience, you can't buy it, just like you can't buy a helicopter's license. I had to go through the whole rigmarole of landing without a motor in a helicopter from 3,000 feet. I had to fly amongst trees and do all these sort of things. Very dangerous, perhaps, initially when you're not a good helicopter pilot. I did it because I couldn't buy that experience. And you can't buy political experience. You cannot buy it. And that's why, as I watch the performance of certain people today, I think, what an awful thing, but it all stems from lack of experience and background, and also the ability of within themselves to be positive and strong.
And believe in themselves.
And believe in themselves, correct.
In 1948, you disagreed with your party. You refused to accept, I think it was a £200 then, increase in a backbencher's salary. Subsequent to that, you turned down a very lucrative offer of a superannuation scheme. Was that good politicking, or was it having the courage of your convictions?
Well, it was having well, not the courage of my conviction, but it was a belief. See, in those days it was under Ned Handon, right a long time back, over about 40 years ago. I saw it every year, every time after an election, that the boys would all get together. That was the Labour boys, the Liberal boys, and then the Country Party as they then were. And I heard them say, on one occasion there, we might as well make it worthwhile because we just as sure get shot for a lamb as for a sheep. So let's make it a sheep. Let's make it worthwhile. And they gave themselves a superannuation scheme many times that, in those days, of what the ordinary person could get. Most of them never got anything. And of course, it was on the basis that it's a risky job and you might lose your job and all the rest of it. I proved that wasn't wrong, but it was there 40 years. But I would have had, well, a long way over $1 million. Some of them are, up high, But because of 40 years, I said no, because I didn't think it was fair and right, so I didn't take it. And our salary, they had in those days a system, we'll always wait, they all had among themselves, we wait till after the election, immediately after the election we put our salaries up. And I said, that's wrong. So on a number of occasions, I gave all that extra money back to my electorate. I painted all the buildings at the showgrounds one year. And one occasion after an election, I had 77 schools in my electorate. I gave them all money for the libraries, those sort of things. It was soon forgotten, and people said to me, Joe, you're stupid. You might as well keep the money because it's forgotten the day after you give it and do it. But at least I had the conviction in myself that I hadn't taken advantage of my position to get more money.
Thank you, Sir Joh.
Thank you.
In this second interview, Sir Joh has continued to discuss the possibility of failure. And although he rarely acknowledges it, for instance, the Joh for PM campaign in which the involvement of others contributed to its disastrous result, he agrees that, in the end, a leader must shoulder the responsibility. Something like, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. In the now famous South East Queensland Electricity Board dispute, Sir Joh says he had great pressure put on him to give in to the unions, but in refusing to do so, he demonstrated an essential quality of leadership. Have faith in your own judgment at all times. Effective communication is important to Sir Joh. He discusses using friends and relatives, the kitchen cabinet for instance, as sounding boards for ideas and to gain reaction. But he emphasises the importance of using people he believes are wise and trustworthy. However, he says a leader must always make the final decision, no matter how unpopular it may be at the time. Finally, Sir Joh stresses the need for a successful leader to be positive and to believe in himself, always. So you've decided to learn more about the qualities of leadership. You know, a man who'd been in politics for just 3 years wrote in March 1950, "I'm keen on politics because," and he went on to explain an obsession that led him into the highest political position in Queensland. When Johannes Bjelke-Petersen became Premier on August the 8th, 1968, John Gorton was the Prime Minister of Australia, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the United States President, and Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain. Johannes was 57, an age at which most people have retired. Over nearly 20 years, he changed the state dramatically. And in fact, the effects of his leadership should include those he had on a whole nation. Now, whether you admire the man or not, this series of interviews with Sir Joh will help you understand how Johannes became a leader and why his leadership qualities kept him at the top for longer than Gorton, Baines Johnson or Wilson.
So, Joh, we've just been talking about the courage of one's convictions.
Yes, yes.
Do you think, as a leader, you have to have the courage of your convictions, and why?
Well, first of all, if you didn't have the courage of your convictions, you wouldn't be a leader. You wouldn't be a leader. You'd be well, I don't know how to describe it. But you have to have the conviction, and you have to give the lead. Oh, yes.
But isn't that all about believing in yourself and...
Oh, yes, you have to believe. First of all, I don't know that so much about yourself, but you've got to believe in what you're promoting. You've got to believe in what you're doing. In the days when we had all these street marches across Australia, when people by the thousands, tens of thousands of them, 20,000 in Melbourne, 10,000 in Sydney, took over the streets and went through knocking cars and doing all sorts of things. We didn't let them do it here in Queensland, simply because I had the conviction and a belief that that was wrong, that there's only one law for everybody. So we stopped it in Queensland. And you have to have that conviction.
Even though you perhaps are getting a lot of people against your views and so
even my own party didn't have enough common sense and brains. The leader and deputy leader flew to England one day to tell me just before the election that I'd have to buckle down and forget about it and let them march. Otherwise, they said we'd lose the election. I said, you can keep your jolly job as a Premier if that's what you want. I'm not going to go to let people run around the streets breaking all the laws and doing all sorts of things just because the whim strikes them. And so I stuck to my guns, and you know, on 2 elections they did that the week of the elections. And the TV showed all the shoes and thongs and bags all over the street, and I got a bigger vote every time. Because I knew that the people as a whole did not want this lawlessness in their midst. Because so many, wherever I went around the state, said, Joh, don't you ever let them do this. Don't you let them take over our streets like they do in the other streets. And I had the conviction, I stuck to it. And I was opposed, as you indicated. But I knew that ultimately, because of my greater knowledge and experience and meeting of people and travelling, that apart from the fact, as I said, there's only one law in the state, or should be, not like some of the other states where you can have half a dozen different laws. By the way, I like Mr. Greiner. I think he's going to make a good Premier. He started off well. I wish him well.
Good.
Yeah.
As a leader, surely, and with the opposition we've just been touching on, which has been opposition to you and your policies, you've had death threats. In fact, you've had attempts on your life.
Yes.
With that sort of stress that you have had, how were you able to continue to cope and still resolutely continue on the track that you knew you had to go on, despite the fact that you had people disliking you, obviously intensely?
Yes. Oh, there are a lot of people, they either love you or don't like you or don't love you. And sure, there were many years. I had for 3 years a man sitting outside my door every night. I had for 3 years the windows in my rooms all boarded up at Parliament House. I lived in a dark room, apart from the light I could switch on. And that didn't deter me. I wasn't concerned. I left the worry and the problem, well, the police, Bob, and the people around me. I said, that's your job. You look after that part of it. I went ahead doing my job. And I believed, well, one's life in this world is you commit yourself into God's keeping day by day, and you do what you do, and then you forget about the worry. It never really did concern me at any time, even though we might have had 5 or 6 loads of detectives pursuing these people who had guns, who were trying to get at me. And there were a number of times when that happened. Same up at John, up in the property. But no, you go and do your job, and I never even lost a wink of sleep over it.
So you don't really see it extraordinary at all that you were able to cope and get through? You thought it was just part of life?
Well, I accepted it part of life, because if you're going to back off because of these sort of things, then what happens to the people? The people have a right to demand and expect you to do what was the right thing. And in those days, they were pretty tumultuous sort of days, and there was enormous pressures on one. And even, you know, at the university, Professor Cowan in those days, as he then was, told me to keep off the campus grounds and so on. I said, well, if you can look after it, Selwyn, the campus out there, and save the government's property, I will keep off it. But if you can't look after it, the university, I'll look after it for you. I told him that very straight one day. And in the earlier days when he first came there, when they were starting to wreck the university in one of the rooms out there, I sent the police in to turf them all out. And we never had any more problems.
Do you think a leader is born, or do you think he's made?
Well, I wouldn't say that he's born necessarily. I think that a lot of people perhaps get into a position. You take the man who took over from me. I mean, his circumstances developed in a way that he took over a position that he hadn't won any by what you call straight down the road, in the sense that it was a coup that was organised against me. Now, I don't know whether you say he was born to be a leader, but it doesn't, his performance doesn't indicate that very well as far as I'm concerned. But I think that you develop it, you have within yourself, no doubt, the capacity or the character and the ability to stand by decisions. You have to stand by decisions. You give a pledge and an undertaking, and you keep it. Now, I gave a pledge many times at election time, even in Gladstone, where all the ETU people were. I said, anybody want a written guarantee that the power and the lights will stay on while I'm Premier, I'll give you one. And there were many, many, many hundreds in the street of Gladstone. And I said, anybody here want a written undertaking by Joh Bjelke-Petersen the lights and the power will stay down? Because Gladstone was the main trouble centre.
Yes, indeed.
And nobody put up their hands. I said, well, you know jolly well that we'll make sure you do. After the crowd started to disperse, I was standing there talking to a number of people still left behind. They gradually dispersed, and a group of people came up to me, and they laughingly said to me, Mr. Premier, we reckon you might be right. The power will stay on. We ETU people out at the power station. But they were good enough and humorous enough, and I think they saw the advantage of having stability in their industry. And you know, they accepted it. I never had any problem with that, and the power stayed on. And we set the mechanism where it's still on. How long, who knows?
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
So, Joh, you're known as a workaholic.
Yes.
Why is work so important to you relative to being successful?
Well, really in life, I suppose, particularly as a leader, but in life, you can't expect to get too far down the road to success if you don't work. And I always say to young students, I've said it hundreds of times, you get out of life what you put into it. You get out of the bank what you put into the bank. You've got to put money into the bank if you want to get it out. But sooner or later you have to pay it or put it in. And so you get out of life what you put into it. If you put a lot into life, go the extra mile, as I said to young people, and nothing will stop you. Make yourself indispensable, I said to young people. You make yourself indispensable, then if you're working with me, then I'll want to keep you. That's why I wanted to keep all the years the people that I had around me. And that one on Beryl Young, many people wanted her job, male pilots, many of them. I said, she's made herself indispensable, she's efficient, on time, great pilot. There's no chance of you getting the job.
But understanding all that, I mean, there are a lot of people, obviously, in Australia who do work hard, but
yes.
You, extraordinarily, can well start at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and still be going 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Oh, much later than that.
Indeed, that's right.
So well after midnight.
Therefore, Sir Joh, what's the point? I mean, you know, why is it that you have this drive to literally work above and beyond the call of duty? Why?
Well, it's my make-up, I guess, and it's because there's a challenge, there's so much to do, and I couldn't help smiling when I read of a certain gentleman the other day who took my place, saying that he has to ease up, he's working too hard. I thought, well, isn't that amazing? I suppose he's a third of my age, or whatever it is, and he's working too hard. And that, to me, is incredible, and doesn't excite me as one who could run that position, because I found that working the long hours I did, that there was still an awful lot to do, and there was no end to it. And you can, as you say, you can make it easy if you want to. You don't need to do all the things that I was doing, sure, but you won't go ahead, and the nation won't get, the state won't get the benefits of the things you can do if you put a lot into it.
So therefore, obviously, in successful leadership, one of the things that you're obviously identifying is hard work.
You've got to have hard work. You can't escape it. If you're going to be successful yourself, or you're going to be successful as a leader or a premier or in business, you've got to put in a lot of work, a lot of time, accept a lot of responsibility, a lot of criticism, no doubt, and so on.
But surely, I mean, most of us need to relax. You appear not to relax at all.
No, I could relax now, and people at Kingaroy, I remember the day, a few days after I stepped down as premier, and it became known that I wasn't going to come home, there was a group of people standing in a circle at Kingaroy, and my son-in-law happened to be one of them. And he was telling me about it. He said they were all saying, isn't it terrible the things that have happened to Joh? Whatever has the party done or come to, that it would do this and cause the chaos they're going to cause and so on. And they said, to think that Joh now has the opportunity of retiring and coming home, he's got properties, he's got many things, and he's still going to keep on going. And they just couldn't believe that I still wanted to do something. And they thought that was incredible, that you still wouldn't want to try and relax.
There seems to be an insatiable fire there that seems to push you on all the time.
Well, a fire, a desire. I only thought of myself as a servant of the people. You know, the night that I became a Member of Parliament 41 years ago, I had a ring from a neighbour who lives some miles away. He rang me up and he said, "Joe, I don't know whether to congratulate you or not tonight. I've just heard on the radio, long before the TV came about, and he said, I've heard on the radio, this was 9 o'clock at night, that you have won the seat of Nanango, as it then was heard, and you're now my member." I said, "Yeah, Horace, yes, that's right. I've got quite a good lead on the opponents. There's no way any of them can win." And he said, "Well, I don't know whether to congratulate you or not, because..." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Simply because yesterday you were my friend. Now you're only my servant. From now on, you're my servant." And Flo and I have always remembered that we're servants of the people. We try to serve the people. And that's the motivating force, to serve people and to work with a dedication to make Queensland a good place in which to live. And I think we can say over the years, because I've hammered it so much, what a wonderful place Queensland is to live in, that I've caused many a laugh and many a smile at an opening of some building or other, particularly someone who's come from down south or overseas. I said, "Now that you've established this business in Queensland, there's nothing more sure that you're going to succeed and you're going to do very well, because you're in Queensland." And everybody would sort of laugh, and it became known that if you came to Queensland, it was a good place, and you'd do well. And that, I guess, is the concept of serving people and trying to make it a good place. And Queensland has prospered enormously and grown enormously.
Indeed. So, Joh, you coined the Bjelke-Petersen motto, if you like, as I would call it, punctuality and reliability. What do you exactly mean by that? Those two words were very important to you.
Well, one of the things, I know a certain federal member of Parliament who is at one time Deputy Prime Minister down south, not Mr Anthony, but someone else, I won't mention his name. Right. He often said, "Look, it doesn't matter we're late today, don't worry, nobody can start and do anything before you come." And I thought that was awful. If you're half an hour late and people will be waiting. One of the things that I didn't like doing was making people wait for me. And say sometimes if you were going somewhere and there was a hold up in the traffic or other and you were late and people were waiting, I always felt very apologetic to the people who wait. And so we had an objective. If we were flying anywhere, I can pretty well guarantee that 99 times out of 100 we'd be there 10 minutes, quarter of an hour beforehand. And people right throughout Queensland learnt to know that if Joh was coming, they had to be there before time. It became such a factor. And in that regard, it grew to an extent. It was between Miss Young, Beryl Young, and myself. She'd say, "What time do you want me on Monday morning?" I'd say, "Oh, 6:30. She'd be there at 6:15. So then I would be there at 6:10. And so then she would be there at 6 o'clock. So in the end, Florence said to both of us one day at the airport, "Now, for goodness sake, when are you going to say 6:30 or 7 o'clock and stick to it?" And so I'd say to Beryl, "Now, I won't come before 6:30, and don't you come before either." But again, one of us would get there a bit earlier. But that's the sort of motivating force I've had all my life, because I think it's bad if you keep people waiting and you can't be on time. That if you can't organise yourself to be efficient and on time, then you can't organise anything else or anybody else.
And of course, obvious enough, you'd certainly subscribe, I'd imagine, to the idea that a good organiser makes a good leader.
Yes, this is true, a good organiser. As a matter of fact, when I was Works and Housing Minister, that's really how I became Premier. Frank Nicklin made me in beginning of 43 to Works and Housing Minister. In 63, he made me Works and Housing Minister. And that is an area where you come into contact with every single member of Parliament. Every member represents an electorate. And he's got all sorts of problems. The school wants painting, the courthouse wants rebuilding, wants a new police station or something else, all over Queensland. Now, every year, I flew all in a single-engine aeroplane. As Works and Housing Minister, I went to tip of Cape York, up and down, round the Gulf, everywhere, into every little nook and corner. Right. I flew that single-engine aeroplane in with one or two of my Works and Housing people. And we went and did a good job so that every member of Parliament here in the city and everywhere, they got looked after, every little detail. And they all got to know, if Joe's looking after you, can forget about it, because I didn't. And I related back to each member of Labour's too. I became very popular with the Labour people. And as a matter of fact, the day I became Premier, I couldn't get over how their attitude towards me changed. Then from being a nice guy, I became a terrible guy that had to be destroyed. And that's true. And in relation to that, for 4 years, in and out of the state, every year I changed the policy in housing. Every year I built housing commission homes in over 100 towns inland in Queensland. Previously they'd been up and down the coast and Brisbane mainly. But I built housing commission towns in Windora, at Ilfracombe, 3, 4, 5 for shearers and so on. We changed the policy and people got to know that Joh was an organiser, and if you left it with him, he would be the one that would look after it, and you didn't have to worry. And I used to ring them. I never posted letters much. I say, right, we'll have somebody there in a month or 6 weeks or 3 days to do that job and starting. And in that context, it's interesting. Then when Jack Pizzey, he became the Premier after Frank Nicholson, because those two had always been very close. That was automatic.
Yes.
The first vote, even though there were many senior men to me at the time, I became Deputy Leader, Deputy Premier, because everybody knew Joh, that they could trust Joh, and he was efficient and he was an organiser. And so then, when Jack Pizzey suddenly died one night after about 8 months, when we had the vote in a day or two's time as to who should be the Premier, I got in first vote without any preferences from anybody else. The first vote, I got the bulk of the party's support because they knew of my background in that respect.
Reliability and organisation.
Reliability, that was what it was. And I think that's so important if we want to get a job or you want to work for a firm, get the situation where that you make yourself indispensable. Be reliable, be efficient, be on time, and it's surprising what that will do for you. In my case, I just tell you of that so that you know that, or somebody that listens, young people may know just what the secret is. Make yourself indispensable, and as I said, go the extra mile.
Good.
And so people trust you, and boy, oh boy, they won't want to get rid of you. They don't want to keep you.
However, let's be honest about this. During your 19-odd years as Premier of this state, some of your cabinet ministers regrettably didn't perform in their jobs. Now, you'd appointed them.
Yes.
You then had the decision to dismiss them.
Yes.
How did you then justify the fact that you'd appointed them and then had to dismiss them?
Well, the matter of dismissing that I wanted, some have said there were 7 ministers. There were not 7 ministers, there were 5 ministers. I knew that there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of unhappiness, a lot of dissatisfaction because, well, from up on the hill there were Sir Robert and others who had made statements about that I ought to get out and all the rest of it. And ignored the fact that we've got a referendum that I said coming on, ignored the fact that a new Premier would get into trouble. I said to him he would get into trouble very quickly, and they said no, he's got to get his feet under the table. I said the media have a very bad habit of going around the other side of the table, grabbing him by the legs and pulling him under the table. And we see that now today. You look at the cartoons and everything. I said, let me go right up to within a couple of months, and you won't stir up the other parties, like they did as soon as they did. They got Goss and they got Angus Innes, and they reorganised themselves. I said, don't do that, let me stay there. But they couldn't see it. And so, in this context, well,
But can you get to grips with the fact that you had to dismiss ministers or felt you needed to dismiss ministers because of lack of job performance?
Well, it was not only perhaps to a degree in that way. They worked, I suppose, reasonably efficiently. But the point was I wanted to put in a new broom so that when I went, they were well equipped, well organised, and indeed, well, give some of the others an opportunity, because there were others, very, very good people who had never had an opportunity. I wanted to give them an opportunity. 5, not 7.
I think we're probably...
And by the way, let me say this, it was my prerogative. It had nothing to do with the people up on the hill. They should have kept their sticky noses out of it. It had nothing to do with them at all, because we're having regular meetings, sometimes 2 a day, for the last number of weeks, over legislation, one thing or another. They had plenty of opportunities to talk to me.
Sure.
But the main thing is, yes, I felt it would be an advantage to change the system. And you couldn't do it while the House was sitting, you had to wait till afterwards.
Indeed. We're edging in towards, I think, the area of trust and loyalty. You mentioned it earlier. Yeah. Surely, Sir Joh, now, if you look back and you see certain things, for example, that are now being revealed in the Fitzgerald Inquiry, and indeed things that happened to you in in December 1987 and then January 1988. Surely you must have some doubts now about trusting people too much.
Well, that is one aspect that I indicated before that went wrong. I didn't look behind me enough as to what was going on. I trusted people, and I've always had that probably failing, that I've always stuck to people unless you can prove that they're definitely wrong. I stuck to Russ Innes and Don Lane. I said, I'll stick to you. Yes, you stay in Cabinet until you're proven, actually proven wrong. And in that sense, yes, I should have perhaps been more alert to what was going on. But again, I guess these are things that you, looking back on, I should have taken more recognition that, and taken a recognition of the fact that there were certain things taking place that could lead to the situation that eventually did.
But do you think, though, that a leader must always believe and trust people nevertheless?
You've got to lead, you've got to trust people, yes, and if you can't have them in your cabinet, or you can't have them in around you if you don't trust them to extent. Though I would admit for quite a while towards the end of my career, I wasn't trusting a number of them because they were leaking everything to the media, and they were inciting some of the backbenchers to oppose me and also to take a line of opposition to whatever I wanted to do. And so in that sense, yes, you do get to a point at times where the solidarity that I boasted of for donkey's years that existed in the National Party vanished. It disappeared. There is no longer any solidarity in the National Party. That record that we had that lasted for so many years, where we were, as I said, rock solid and nothing but shifters, is gone. And it will never return. I'm sure that it can't. Because
why do you think that solidarity with the inherent loyalty that it bred, why do you think it dissipated?
Well, it's simply because people wanted to change the policy of the party. They wanted to go into a freer, easier lifestyle, if you like to term it that way, right across the board. Prostitution, abortion, condoms and loose living and so on, that I didn't and wouldn't go into. And that's where and then therefore they said, all right, we'll have to get rid of you, and they did seek to do that, just that.
Are you suggesting blind loyalty? Loyalty without
No, I
question?
don't suggest blind loyalty, and I would say in Cabinet and in our party meetings, I naturally had to accept and listen to many of their arguments, and accepted many of their arguments that perhaps I thought there was a better way of doing it. Oh no, we don't have a blind loyalty at all. But on issues that are policy, like this one that they changed course on, they have caused the greatest disaster to the National Party that anybody could ever cause, because you cannot switch from a very conservative policy that we had on which we won the election. And when they talk about some of the things that I was supposed to have done that were bad judgments, the President was talking about the bad judgment about Lindeman Island. We won an election since then. We won quite a number of new seats, but nothing to do with it. The ICI plant, and then out here at on the jail site out there, all these sort of things. They made mountains out of a molehill, and they were the ones that stirred it up. No,
A number of people have said, Sir Joh, that because you were dictatorial, your dictatorial aspects then diminished the loyalty that your people had for you.
No, if they say that, and some of them might think this is true, what are they getting now when they haven't got a determined, strong carrier? What are they getting anyhow? Where are they going? Are they cementing the party and making it strong again? You know as well as I do what's happening.
So you would say that there's a big difference between dictatorial and a determined leader. There's the difference.
Very, very big. A dictatorial one who says, well, I don't need a cabinet, I don't want a cabinet, I won't call cabinet together, I'll do everything myself. We met every week. We met every week, except just over New Year and Christmas time, a couple of weeks. Good. But no, we had a cabinet meeting and every item was discussed, every item was argued. The only thing is I went out in the lead and got things organised to a degree before I brought them to cabinet, like Expo, like the space station and other things.
Thank you, Sir Joh.
Thank you.
To be a leader, you must have the courage of your convictions, no matter what adversity you face. And this was one of the characteristics of leadership discussed at the beginning of this tape. Sir Joh says you need to have the strength to always believe in what you're doing and follow it through, never back off. The need for hard work also is essential. He says you get out of life what you put into it. And he goes on to discuss his early days of contract clearing, leading to the later days as Queensland's leader, where at age 77, he still worked at least 14 hours a day, and he loved it. Using the phrase, Make yourself indispensable. He says once people recognise this attitude, they come to need you and your services. And to Sir Joh, serving the people was paramount to his role as political leader. Punctuality and reliability were related most amusingly. The series of incidents involving he and his pilot, Beryl Young, keeping their appointments. He says to be a good leader, you must be reliable and be able to organise your time effectively. In the final part of this tape, you've seen how important loyalty is to Sir Joh. He says without it you can't hope to qualify as a leader, and although he doesn't expect blind loyalty, such as that given by team members who don't question, he does expect total support once a decision is made. However, he says a dictatorial attitude won't engender loyalty. Sir Joh believes successful leadership comes with hard work, attention to the needs of your people, belief in your decisions, and the loyalty of those in whom you've placed your trust. So you've decided to learn more about the qualities of leadership. You know, a man who'd been in politics for just 3 years wrote in March 1950, I'm keen on politics because, and he went on to explain an obsession that led him into the highest political position in Queensland. When Johannes Bjelke-Petersen became Premier on August the 8th, 1968, John Gorton was the Prime Minister of Australia, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the United States President, and Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain. Johannes was 57, an age at which most people have retired. Over nearly 20 years, he changed the state dramatically. And in fact, the effects of his leadership should include those he had on a whole nation. Now, whether you admire the man or not, this series of interviews with Sir Joh will help you understand how Johannes became a leader and why his leadership qualities kept him at the top for longer than Gorton, Baines Johnson or Wilson.
Sir Joh, as the leader of a team of winners,
Yes.
when you sit down to pick your team
Yes.
as the leader,
Yes.
what are the qualities you look for in those men and women?
Well, I'd probably put number one, loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is very, very important. And this is why they've all gone down in my estimation enormously when I discovered that they didn't have the loyalty I thought they had. Now, because I would go through thick and thin with anybody. I've had many people who have been before the courts that I've still supported, particularly National Crimes Authority people. And I've supported them right through, never hesitated. And that's a trait I sort of require and exhibit myself. But I also take into account, yes, their general, singly, their various abilities, what you have, what he has, and so on, how it could fit into a particular portfolio, where he lives, how long he's been a member of Parliament, has he been successful, is he a good member of Parliament?
So the experience is important?
Yeah, the experience, his background, and does he qualify in these various areas? Will he make a good servant to the people? Does he mix well? Does he talk to the people easily and freely? Or does he hold his head up and sort of walk past ordinary working people?
So what about hard work?
Yes, I expect that. That's automatic, and I think they know that. Most of them are keen and want to work, and they do work fairly hard. It's not easy to be a Member of Parliament. You have to travel a great deal, and as I indicated before, you have to forego many times when you'd like to go home of a weekend when you can't. Or particularly those who have to come to Brisbane. Those in Brisbane, of course, they can be home every night, or some time of every night. But once you're outside Brisbane away, well, of course, you have a situation which is not easy to be a good Member of Parliament and at the same time also a good husband and father and back home.
Yes, indeed. Success and failure on a project depends a lot, I think you'd agree, on planning.
Yes, it does, my word.
How do you go through that planning process? Take, for example, Expo. You briefly described it before, but in technical terms, how did you come to grips with, in the end, saying that Expo was going to work and you knew it was going to work?
Well, first of all, most people, very many people, only look around themselves all the time, around their feet. They tramp around the same puddle, as it were, all the time. They do not look and extend their views and their thoughts. Forward thinking, forward planning has always been a very strong part of my philosophy. When I was in our contracting, I had to sit down and I had to work out in my mind every single item. I was shifting truckloads and low loaders with equipment on, say some hundreds of miles, and I could not afford to go back and pick up certain pieces of equipment if it was. So every item, and there were scores of them, and I took responsibility in all our shifting to be sure that every single item went to do a particular type of job, a grader and end loaders and dozers or whatever was required, and all the tools and all the equipment. And so in the doing of things, it just fitted into what I was specializing in days gone by. Planning and thinking ahead and being able to see into what was required under all circumstances in the future. And so in a similar way, in the Expo, I said to myself, well, we wouldn't take any of our local money, our taxpayers' money as it were. We'd borrow it at a reasonable rate, which we could get at better than in most states.
Yes. And
we would do it that way. Compensate everybody very well. I always believe in overpaying where you took land from people. Always said that.
Right.
By Ivanhoe Dam, we did that remarkable degree of success, and over here fairly well also. Paid them what I said generously. You've got to pay them because they got to shift. Now, you do these sort of things and you work it all out. And then I knew that ultimately we would sell the land. It would be valuable land after Expo because of the factor that it's a prime site and so on. The site told me that you couldn't go wrong. If you buy land in the right place, then you know the price will go up and it'll be worth more and more money, not less. And that's a prime site. So we did all these things knowing that, yes, there was no problem, no worry. I never even worried about it.
We're talking about planning.
Yes.
On August the 8th, 1968, you became Premier of this state.
Yes.
How much planning had gone into that?
Well, I don't think I'd done a great deal of planning as far as that. I felt that that was all that the organisational part of our organisation would be prepared to accept. So Robert was continually opening the door, shouting out through that Joe's got to go, shutting the door and then going in and watching TV that night. He was doing that a number of times. Very naughty, exceedingly naughty, as he did on Lindeman Island, the ICI plant. He was very, very naughty. It always reminded me of Vince Lester. You remember Vince Lester? He's an interesting personality in many respects. He had an obsession that the doors always of toilets had to open outwards.
Right.
Because if you open them inwards, the man could collapse and you couldn't open the door.
Right.
And so he set a mission that he would perfect that in everybody's mind. And the doors had opened. So he got an old toilet, you know, with a three-pointed roof, an old tumble-down one, on the back of a truck at some big sports event at Emerald. And he went around the ring a few times. He had a straw hat on. He'd open the door out with the toilet out, take his hat off, wave to the people, go back, put his hat on, go back into the toilet and close the door. And then in a couple of minutes, a bit further, as the truck went slowly around, he'd open the door again, take his hat off, put his hat on, close the door and go back in again. And so in a similar way, these people up there at the hill, they would criticise us and condemn us and things, and then go in again, close the door, and watch TV, see what happened. Big note themselves as the running of the party. All the time watching what they thought the people wanted.
Yes.
When there was a bit of a noise at Rankin of the jail there, came out then after that and said, You've got to shift it. What a terrible decision. The ICI plant that Ahern put there, not me. I held it up for 12 months.
Yes.
And he said, what a terrible, irresponsible decision. Lindeman Island, when it was all over and finished. And so they've done these things all along that have been very disastrous for the party and for me, and brought our ratings down.
But I don't know. I think you might be being perhaps a bit modest here. If you look back on your history, you were elected to the Kingaroy Shire Council. Then from there you were elected. You gained pre-selection for the state seat of Menango and took the seat with a majority of 1,200 votes.
Yes.
Then from there you became Deputy Premier of the Country Party in Queensland, and then you took the premiership. Now, I can't believe, Sir Joh, that you hadn't got some master plan organised all through that.
Some master plan? I was interested in politics. I'd helped Mr. Adderman and the federal member for a long time. My sister also did a lot of the clerical work for him. We did it together, and also the state member. But I was very interested in my contracting. I was making more money in one day than I could make in a whole year as a member of parliament. I didn't really want to get into politics. I said that repeatedly to the people who wanted me to go in. And so I wasn't really planning for it. Never really did plan for it. I had a very successful career in contracting our properties. We had quite a number of properties by that time, and I had to walk away from it and cross the border, as it were, into no man's land, from private enterprise, leave Bethany in a lovely property, well improved, contracting work, aerial spraying, and go over into the field of politics. I was like a stranger in a strange land when I got there. It was so different. The people looked the same. You know, they had arms and legs just like we did, but they didn't work physically.
Right.
They, like we did from where I came, we worked very hard physically in all our contracting work, but it was strenuous work.
Yes.
These people that I got into in the political arena, their tools of trade was an ability to talk.
Yes.
And some of them were interesting and some of them weren't very interesting. And I could tell you lots of things about that. That's probably why we got 2 bars at Parliament House for where they could spend a lot of time when some of them weren't so interesting to listen to.
You've always appeared so confident when dealing with matters relating to the opposition to your way of thinking. Privately, though, how much concern do you or have you had when you know there's opposition against what you want to do or you've said? How much does it affect you privately?
Not anything at all. I think in politics you learn to expect opposition, expect people to not like you, and nobody wants people to hate you, but you soon learn that a lot of people hate you intensely and abuse you and call you all sorts of things. But apart from that, you do what you think is right, and you persist in it, and you continue to do it.
So as a leader, one of the things you have to come to grips with is that people aren't going to like you or agree with you.
Well, this is quite true. You have to accept that particular point. You have to realise that you can't please everybody, and so you do what you think is right.
So it's not for the faint-hearted?
No, it is not. My word, it is not. You're no good talking about consensus and running around in circles, mucking up your own time and everybody else's time. That makes me sick when I hear it. And I told Hawke that in his first summit down there. And a lot of people have learned a lot of things, how they were hoodwinked and so on. They're not part of the government as they were told to be, and the present people here in the House, they were all going to be part of a consensus. I'd like to know how much consensus goes on there. It's, from what I gather, it's not quite what they thought originally and what was envisaged.
You've been a leader without very much of an academic background. How much better do you think you could have been as a leader with perhaps a degree in economics or perhaps accounting or even psychology or agriculture?
I'll put it this way, how much worse would I have been if I had had that? Or how far less leader would I have been if I had that?
Yes.
Now, the present Premier, he's got a degree in agriculture. Let you work it out for yourself.
Do you think, though, that...
First of all, I did do a lot of correspondence, past my average schooling, as I've told you at different times.
Yes.
The other factor, of course, is I've been in one big school ever since. One big school ever since. Every day you learn something. Every day you're learning something, you're gaining something. And when I see the way political people who haven't had much experience politically, doesn't matter if they get 20 degrees, they so often make well, a fool of themselves, do the wrong thing, and having the capacity to do the things they want to do. No, I think that the circumstances and the things, or the way you apply yourself, it's a matter of, as I've always described it, put 2 feet in the ground. Keep your 2 feet in the ground. Don't float in space, airy-fairy sort of stuff. Be a realist. And make your judgments on that basis with 2 feet. And also, never put your foot on the sticky paper. Never say you've heard a lot about the Premier and that he didn't do when at the time of the takeover, and implying something. He put 1 foot in the sticky paper. After then, he had to go to the the Fitzgerald Inquiry, and forced to sort of tell them something that he thought might have been true. And that is what I mean. You put 1 foot in the sticky paper, it leads to the next one, you've got to put the next foot on. And then thirdly, ultimately, of course, you're going to make a fool of yourself.
The media in the past have always painted you as being perhaps in one way a very strange communicator. Perhaps you've fooled them all along the track. How do you see yourself as a communicator? Because obviously communication must be a very important part of being a leader.
It's very important that we communicate with people. I agree with that, but not always just the way the media want you to reply to their questions, because they have very perhaps one-sided or lopsided questions they ask, and so they get this impression of me that's been recorded at times that I'm unusual. But on the other hand, I appreciate the media, the role they play and the importance of it. I think that we've got to, all of us, do as much as we can to communicate with people so they can make the judgments on the decisions we make. I once said to Mrs. Thatcher, and I've met her quite a number of times, right early in the piece when she became Prime Minister, I said to Mrs. Thatcher, you, I believe, should do much more speaking to the media and with the media. She said they always misrepresent me. But I said, Mrs. Thatcher, if you're a leader, you've got to make as many comments as you can on issues so that people can make their judgment. Are you right or wrong? And if they support you otherwise. I believe she followed that example. And I learned that from the Agent General in London, that she hadn't, well, been prepared to talk to the media very much at all, because it always sort of came out the other end the wrong way. And now she does. And I think it is important that we communicate and we tell people why we did these things. And I know that, in particularly editorials, I often think down the years, I'd like to sort of get one of those editorials at times and give him a good shake, because he has so misrepresented the situation because, well, he's probably not quite familiar with all the details, or didn't want to be familiar with the details, and so writes his own story in relation to it. And then again, I've got to realise that it's part of life, and I accept it, whatever they write. And the main thing is that you get around amongst the people, meet the people, and they get to know and to trust you. And all my travelling around Queensland is what stood by me, I'm sure, over the years. They got to know and trust me because we went into every nook and corner, which had never happened before. I was the first Premier, probably because I flew and had the opportunity to get into every nook and corner. From the tip of Cape York and up into all the islands, we landed on the islands, built airstrips on them, and we came to the people, and we met the people. Do you know, before I became Premier, even up at Killarney, there had never been a Premier in all our 100 years and more of a state. There'd never been a Premier to Killarney. I flew my little aeroplane in there myself, landed in a paddock, and there was like a show day on. They came from everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of cars, and the same applied inland.
And again, that communication
that
thing
communication.
Yes, right.
And that's why we won the seats from Labor. It wasn't the gerrymander that won it, it was the same as the Labor had. But we had better policies, and I communicated direct with the people. And so that is important communication. I agree, and the media play a big part in that.
When you became Premier,
yes,
and you obviously understood, as you've said now, that communication was so vital, did you take steps to learn how to effectively communicate with the media, for example?
No, it was automatic.
Right.
Simply because, well, over the years, I'd been contracting for many, many years, harvesting crops, various types of crops. I went from farm to farm. I went for many, many months every year. I was contracting with bulldozers and then with aerial spraying. All these things took me out amongst the people, and I learned how to get jobs, to communicate with people. I go down here to, for example, I still love it, even though I'm not in politics. If I go, like I did the other day, past a big building site just up the road here a little, I went over to all the men sitting there having lunch. I said, any chance of a job? And they said, have you got a union ticket? I said, If you tell me where I can get one, I'll jolly soon well get a union ticket because I want a job. I want one urgently. And of course they all laughed, said, "Good on you, Joe, we'll give you a job." And I said, "Great." And I communicate with people. That's, in other words, what it's all about.
How, though, you mentioned earlier on about when the media ask you questions, you don't always give them the answer that they're looking for. No. How do you know which answer they're looking for so that you can answer it the way you do? I can tell you this,
I would make a perfect media man because I can see the first few lines or sentence, what they're driving at. And I can, it's just like as if you told me and before, you get that experience and background. And you know if you say a certain thing, that will be the headline. And so you don't say it if you don't want to. Oh, it's just experience. It's all experience.
Do you think that the media, during your nearly 20 years of Premier of the State of Queensland, do you think they gave you a fair go by and large or not?
Or I helped to make that reasonably fair by taking the action that I did. But I feel, as I said earlier, that if the media would become more positive and supportive in good ideas and concepts, rather than always trying to find holes in it and pick problems in it and destroy. Build up, don't destroy. Make it interesting and attractive but true, and so on.
But they argue and say, of course, they've got to have a decent story.
That's the problem. That is the big problem with the media. They don't want to relate something good, really. So often, they've got to make it look bad. As I said to the Bond inquiry in Sydney the other day, when I was down there in the box, I was sitting in the box, I said, I'll guarantee if I had like this, a cup of tea like we had before, if I was sitting here and having a cup of tea, I said, I'll bet you the media could invent some reason to say that the tea in that cup that the Premier had was stolen, or he got it as a bribe, somebody put it in there for him. I said, it doesn't matter. I have so many times been accused of an ulterior motive for it, and they could find an ulterior motive in the fact that I was having a cup of tea. Now that's how far it's got. And while we talk about the freedom of the press, sure, good, but the press have a very big responsibility. They have a responsibility to report accurately and fairly and justly. And if they keep going the way they do, well, they get into a situation someday, not me or anybody else, perhaps now, will do something about the media, because you can't have the media running their way and then not reporting accurately all the time. Perhaps it's because they have rush periods. You know, I took one chap to court simply because he wanted to make a sensational talk about me raising some money for John in Tokyo when I should have been on government business. And all this sort of stuff. That's wrong, completely wrong, and there's far too much of it.
Character assassination.
Yeah, well, they try to, but they didn't.
Sir Joh, most leaders seem to have a healthy ego. How about you?
I have no ego. I'm just an ordinary chap, as I said to the inquiry down there the other day. They laughed. I said, I'm just an ordinary person like anybody out in the street. I worked hard all my life. I've used an axe and a grubber grubbing out trees for years and years and doing all sorts of hard, menial work, if you like to term it that way. And I have no ego in the sense of thinking Joe's somebody mighty. I never have. I'm just a servant of the people, as I told you before.
But you're proud of yourself and your achievements.
Oh, yes. Surely. Well, not proud. I don't like that word. I never use it. I'm glad that Queensland has prospered and grown and that people have had an opportunity of getting jobs. And this is all why I'm promoting that high-rise building. If somebody wants to spend $1 billion, twice as much as is over in the Expo, why not let them spend it and give 4,000 or 5,000 jobs for many, many years, and the people that will work in it? Why stop it? I can never see this negative attitude. Why stop it when somebody wants to do this, puts us on the map after Expos go? And it will put us on the map. This again, may I say this again is where so many people, our leaders, both in the City Council and here, have no ability to see into the future. They have completely missed the bus. They cannot see, they do not realise what a building of that nature would do for this city and for this state. Put it on the map after Expo's gone. And it amazes me that they have so little ability or so prejudiced for some reason or other that they will try and stop that and do everything in their power to stop it. I just can't work it out. Very negative. And negative people don't usually get too far in life, really.
Your political opponents have painted you, to quote, as a ruthless, despotic, arrogant, uncaring man. Are you?
I bet you they know that that's not true. I bet you they know that that's true. As I said a little earlier on this program, that they loved me and praised me in the House, everywhere, when I was working as Housing Minister, when I could do something for them. But when I became Premier, then I became the vilest, the wickedest, the, well, whatever you like to describe it as you did there, Premier the state had ever seen. Then I had to destroy me. And so you can see how untrue it is. It is not true. I'm just an ordinary person trying to do a job to the best of my ability. And when you do that, there's always somebody, including a lot of the media, who want to pull you down.
The church and its teachings have always been very important to you.
Sure.
Politics, the cut and thrust of it, the dirt of it. How can you be a successful politician with all the cut and thrust and the dirt, and yet also be a practicing Christian? It seems in...
Well, I think that helps you to be a politician. You can see what happens when they get off the rails like they're going now. They want to go into a moral situation or further it, encourage it and support it. I would never do that because of my Christian upbringing and teaching. That's why I refused point blank to Sir Robert and others, to the Premier, to go down that road that they want to go, because they haven't the understanding and teaching and background or belief in the faith that I have. That sort of a lifestyle destroys a nation, and a nation goes down like all the empires that I have in the history of the world that we have recorded, where you find they go up to a peak, and then through moral degradation and so on, they destroy themselves and become nothing, and another empire comes up. Same political. It'll happen the same in the political arena on the same basis, and you can see it happening already, the fall away of support and so on. So it has a very big bearing. It has a big bearing. My word, it does.
Thank you, Sir Joh.
For me.
Thank you.
In this fourth tape, Sir Joh has discussed the importance of being able to choose and develop a winning team of people and the need for loyalty from that team for its success. Obviously, the ability to do the job is a key element, people who have the right qualifications and experience and the capacity for hard work. Sir Joh also discusses the importance of planning. He says no leader can be successful without planning and should continually develop the ability to think ahead to a project's successful conclusion, following through on his plan step by step. Sir Joh says a leader also must accept the fact that he and his decisions won't always appeal to everyone, and early in his career he came to believe that rather than strive to be popular, a successful leader should strive to be effective. Sir Joh also discusses communication, particularly in relation to dealing with the media, attributing some of his success in this area to anticipating the line of questioning. He says it's paramount that you always keep in mind what you set out to say and refuse to be led away from that objective. Successful handling of the media comes from experience, but in essence, he's saying, don't be afraid of them. Where pride and ego are concerned, Sir Joh says, I'm a servant of the people, and in using that phrase, he successfully verbalizes the value he places on humility. He says the main qualifications necessary for successful leadership are the ability to pick a loyal and dedicated team of experienced people, forward planning and vision to bring a project to its successful conclusion, absolute faith in one's own decisions, and the ability to communicate. So you've decided to learn more about the qualities of leadership. You know, a man who'd been in politics for just 3 years wrote in March 1950, I'm keen on politics because, and he went on to explain an obsession that led him into the highest political position in Queensland. When Joh Bjelke-Petersen became Premier on August the 8th, 1968, John Gorton was the Prime Minister of Australia, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the United States President, and Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain. Johannes was 57, an age at which most people have retired. Over nearly 20 years, he changed the state dramatically. And in fact, the effects of his leadership should include those he had on a whole nation. Now, whether you admire the man or not, this series of interviews with Sir Joh will help you understand how Johannes became a leader and why his leadership qualities kept him at the top for longer than Gorton, Baines Johnson or Wilson.
Sir Joh, we spoke earlier on about your capacity to handle the enormous amounts of stress that you do.
Yes.
Do you seek spiritual guidance in situations like that?
As I've indicated many times right throughout my life, we grew up with a faith and a belief, which I think means so much to us and to me, that I still continue to this day. I read the Bible every day. I pray every day. I ask God's forgiveness and guidance and mercy, blessing, and for wisdom to do what I ought to do. Now, I know that we often fail, all of us, and we're just human beings, and so naturally we are not perfect. No one thinks he is. No one expects to, but I think one has that opportunity, one has that privilege. There's no question in my mind about that. And so this is one thing that I do and always have done all my life.
So humility for a leader is very important.
I think humility is most important. I think that once anybody begins to think he's somebody when he really isn't somebody, and I've never thought of myself as a premier of anything special. I've only thought of myself as someone trying to do a job to the best of his capacity, and it's perhaps hard to realize that one has, the position of Premier. It's just one of those things that it's part of my life that has come into my circle, as it were, to become Premier, a Member of Parliament, the first case. The way has opened up all along the way, and that's how I've always operated. And I believe there's a very special blessing to be gained. And those who ignore it and don't believe it, have no faith, what have they got at the end of life? What is that? What's the purpose of living? And when you think of creation, ourselves, I often love to go at home, if I'm home for a Sunday weekend, to go out on our lawn, watch the sun go down. It's a magnificent sight, particularly these days. For the last 3 or 4 days I've watched the sun go down, a great big ball of red. And you wonder at the majesty of it, the immensity of it. And that's only one tiny, tiny little part of this universe. I have a book on the universe, a huge book like this. And there that's set out by scientists and scientific people who know what they're talking about, upon a galaxy after galaxy. The more they study, the bigger the instruments they get, the more galaxies they find. In each galaxy there's millions and millions of huge planets. Some of them many, many, many times bigger than our sun. They list some that are so big that the 91 million miles that the Earth is away from the sun, they're bigger than that whole circuit of 182,000 million miles across them. Enormous suns. This wonderful universe and the way it all runs, our bodies, the way our bodies are made and operate. Nobody can tell me this just happened out of nothing and started and got running the way it does. And our knowledge, the brain, the computer likeness of our brain, I think is also majestic and marvelous that there is a creator. I believe that, who is set out quite clearly for each and every one of us the purpose of life. We are not perfect, we're sinful people, we acknowledge that, those of us who believe, and that we know that through belief and faith in Jesus Christ as our Saviour, that's God's plan of salvation. He suffered and died for us that we may not suffer. And that's the faith that we have.
Pardon me, you're in essence a very humble man, aren't you?
Well, I am very, very, very much so, always have been, in spite of what people think. And we've only tried to do, as I said, everything we do to the best of one's capacity. That's one's responsibility as well as, well, the privilege.
Sure. You mentioned that you'd read books on other famous people. Is that an aspect of the people who achieve coming through there?
Well, it's very interesting. There are many of these famous men who have achieved big things in their life to read what motivated them, how they started, and how they achieved what they achieved. Ford, for example, he used the first verse of the 11th chapter of Hebrews. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. In other words, he used that verse, as I said to the late Mr. Ford, who's just died, whom I knew quite well, met him quite a number of times. I said, your grandfather, he used that verse in a material sense. Faith was to him, that's something that enabled him to see the tremendous possibility of the car manufacturing business in those far off days when he started. When Edison of whom he was a very good friend, said to him, you've got to come with me in the field of electricity. That's where the opportunity of future lies, not in your horseless sort of buggy that you've manufactured or invented. And Ford said, no, I'm going to go ahead with the motor car or the horseless carriage. And I said to his grandson, I'm sure you know, his grandfather never ever realized what would ultimately lead to his invention, how the car would be all over the world. But he had that faith. It was the substance of things he believed and hoped for, the evidence that he couldn't see. He believed there was a tremendous, and he pursued it, and he achieved, as we know today, the car is a very important part. And so he used that verse, which is in a spiritual sense, which means, for example, you have that faith. It's the substance, faith is the substance, I hope for the evidence that we have that there is a life hereafter, that there is the way God's plan of salvation for us, prepared for us. And that's faith, the spiritual. The interesting thing about faith, it's not something you can earn. It's something that you have if you accept it. And it's a very simple operation. Some people wonder what it's like to be a Christian or seek to be a Christian. It's something you don't earn or win and so on. It's there if you accept it. God's plan of salvation is there if you accept it. On the other hand, that's set out quite clearly in the Bible. And it's a little bit like, for example, if I said to you, I bought a motor car up at Ford's work agency for you, you say, that's interesting to know. But if you don't go up and get the car and drive it away and use it, it's no good to you. It's exactly the same about God's plan of salvation. Lots of people know about it, but they don't accept it. They don't do anything about it. And say, yes, I will believe that. I will accept that. That's what it's all about. It's nothing complicated, but it's a recognition, first of all, that we are sinners in God's sight. We need his forgiveness and his salvation. And that's the belief that my parents imparted to me and that I accepted and I believe.
Your views on sex education in schools, legalised prostitution and condoms, pardon me, are well documented.
Yes.
Many consider your views to be outdated. Shouldn't a good leader be able to monitor and listen to the people that he is Premier of the state of? Do you think
this is true. You listen to them too and you see clearly how wrong they are, because there's nothing will ever convince me what was right and wrong in my grandparents' day can be changed today and be quite different. What was light and darkness in those days, good and bad in my grandparents' day, is still the same today. You can't change that principle. And so in moral issues, you can't, just because people say we want to live this sort of a way, an immoral way, and you see what happened to nations, Rome and other nations in the past that thought they could go a different way. You get to a certain point and the nation goes downhill. And of course, this is clear. And it's not a matter of listening to other people or accepting something new and modern. Is it right or is it wrong was the basis under which I always made judgments in relation to the things I sought to do. Is it right or is it wrong? Is it good or is it bad? Will it be a benefit or blessing to people, in other words? That's the basis. And you can't change those principles. It doesn't matter how much you say.
It's that black and white, is it?
Oh, very much so. And that's quite clear. You cannot change those fundamental principles of light and darkness, right and wrong. Doesn't matter how much you say you don't believe in it, and doesn't matter. And then at the end of life's journey, what have you got if that's all you believe?
Getting back to the leadership issue. One of your strengths is obviously to be able to identify that black or white?
Well, as I see it, yes, this is true. With the background and the teaching, my father was a minister, as everybody would know, for a long period of time. He was a school teacher, first of all. He went to university at Copenhagen, Heidelberg in Germany, and came out here from the University at Heidelberg in Germany for 22 years of age, and was a school teacher in mathematics at Hobart for years, and then later was ordained as a Lutheran minister, went to New Zealand for many years, and also here in Brisbane. He met all he spoke 5 languages, and he met the ships here in the days when there wasn't very much in the line of service on behalf of the government. Asked people as they got off the ships with all their belongings on the wharf, what do you want to do? Can I help you? He gave a life of service, biggest part of his life and service, helping people. And he would say, do you want to go on the land? Tell them where they get land. That's how a lot of the people came into the South Burners, Scandinavians, German people, because Father spoke all those languages. I only speak Danish. I only know one other language apart from our own that he taught me, and which I still speak quite easily and understand. But that's what Father did, and he tried to help people that way and to be of service. And so he taught these things, and he gave us to understand, and which we believe and we accept fully.
So, Joh, can a leader be popular and successful as well?
I guess you can say to a degree he can. I was successful in the sense that I stayed there for 19.5 years or whatever it was before I got pushed over the cliff. And I guess to be the word popular, I must have had more people who voted for me than who didn't vote for me. We always got well above the 50%.
Of course, your political opponents would dispute that fact.
Yeah, but then you bear it out, as I said earlier this morning in another program. You take Senator Flo, where there is no boundaries, no electorate, rigged electorate, just Queensland, just straight out Queensland. And we got on a straight out vote 4 senators into the Senate here in Queensland. And Liberals only got 2. But there was no boundaries, no electorate had been gerrymandered, as it called. A lot of nonsense. They were there when we won the election, and I won most of them after that. There was only a cricket team of 11 Labor people left, simply because we had better policies, and I went in and I met the people, I talked to the people on the same boundaries that the Labor had.
But do you think you can be popular and successful as well?
Well, I guess you can. You get a lot of criticism once you get successful. You can see poor John Elliott, he's a very successful businessman, and he gets criticised a lot, particularly politically, but be that as it may, I don't suppose it matters so much if you're popular or not, as long as you do your job. And then the other things, they follow on automatically.
You've been accused of taking on lost or wayward causes in the past.
Sure.
Milan Brick, the Horvath steam car. As a leader, how closely do you evaluate a project before you decide to endorse it?
Well, we do very closely and carefully. Now, it's all very well talking about Milan Brick, and now we'll hear a lot more about him a little later on. And I've always said, he who laughs last laughs loudest. Now, let's wait and see on Milan Brick. I know where he is and what he's doing and so on today, doing very successfully. Now, the other one, or the other point in regard to that, we sent 8 people over to New Zealand, over to Cook Islands. Now, they all came back. They were all registered to die. And now the medical profession today are doing a lot more of injections of certain, chemicals or whatever it is that you term it, to deal with cancer. Milan Brick's theory was simply this. He said that to cut out the cancer in your body just didn't eliminate the problem. You had to kill the cells in the bloodstream, and that's all he did. He injected into your bloodstream some injection, and he saved those 8 people to go home and had been sent home to die, and one was just a skeleton, had to be carried on board the plane here. They all came home and they all lived a life, except one, a young lad up at Pomona, died a little later on, but all the others had a renewed life. I met them from time to time. Now, those people would say, Milan Brick saved my life, at least for a considerable period of time. What's happened lately, I don't know. But I saw them, I met them, they'd come up to me and thanked me again for sending them over to Cook Island before Milan Brick was chased out. And the doctor in Melbourne who introduced me to Milan Brick, he sent over 70, he was a doctor, sent over 70 people who were all condemned to die in Melbourne, and got a renewed lease of life for many years. Some no doubt have died now. And in relation to Horvath, you have only heard the beginning of it. You haven't heard the end of it. You wait till you hear the end of it, and then your hair will stand up and you will say, good on you, Mr. Premier. You wait and see.
Interesting. So in other words, what you're saying, Sir Joh, is that as a leader, you have done evaluation on these sorts of projects?
Yeah, we do. Very, very carefully. We seek to, and then I suppose you can put it, you take a risk. You say, yes, you will support this or that person. You do the same in relation to individuals. Many people come to me and say, will you give me a job, or will you recommend me for a job? And I have a look at you. I ask you all about your background. You tell me you're a great guy and you've done this and this and this. So I say to this chap over here with this company, Mr. So-and-so would like a job. He's a specialist in this field. He says he has a good record and so on. Will you give him a job? Then after, you might turn out not as good as you told me. Now, I can't help that, but we do the best summing up and evaluation to help people and promote ideas and objects.
On the world scene,
yes,
which political leader do you admire most, or have you admired most, and why?
Well, I guess at the moment there are two that I admire very much, and the one is Mrs. Thatcher, whom I know very well, and I've met her quite a number of times in London and out here before she became a Prime Minister. She was Minister for Education in those days. When I was Premier here, met her here first. And so we came to know one another, and I admire her very, very much. She has tremendous ability, very strong and positive, and stands tight. And her attitudes on Russia and the defence aspect of that whole problem is dead on track as far as I can see, even more so than Reagan, who's prepared to take certain risks that, in my opinion, and I've studied that one very, very closely, as you know, you can do away with certain of these missiles, which are a protection, and no doubt the more we've got to continue to go that way. But at the same time, there should also be a lowering of the numbers and standards of the army and their force, because if we do away with those, as Mrs. Thatcher has been saying, and saying it regularly, you do away with those and Russia can overrun the whole of Europe and England very, very quickly by sheer force and quantity of old-time arms, tanks and the stuff we had in olden days. And that's the problem, and she can see it and she's good.
But do you admire her primarily because of her political direction, or indeed for her character and
well, I would say that she is a very strong character, and that's all tied up together in the one thing. As a Prime Minister, she is tied up, well, good character and strength. Reagan, I've always admired him, and if I was an American, I'd be a Republican without any shadow of a doubt at all, because Reagan has been very, very good for the world. If we didn't have the United States of America, you and I wouldn't be sitting here today. I reckon the Russian fleet and all the rest of it that are here, they would, situation would be entirely different.
What about in Australia? Who do you admire on the Australian scene, or you may
you'll have to give me time to think about that one. Gee, that'd take a bit of working out.
Perhaps who you have admired?
Well, I became very good friends with Sir Robert Menzies, Sir Fadden, and some of those earlier people. I knew them very well. And Sir Robert Menzies, I was asked by him and Dame Patty to come to, whenever in Melbourne, please come out and see Sir Robert and visit him at Tarakati's home, which I did. And we had some great talks, and he was a great inspiration, though he, in his day, might have been a little bit sort of autocratic, perhaps. I don't know. But I've read a deal about him, of course, and so did Arthur Fadden. They were people who were really top people in the field of politics here in Australia.
What about currently?
Currently, as I said to you, I'd have to sit and I think a long time.
What are you suggesting? There's not much talent around?
Well, the real problems. I had support John Howard now at the moment on his attitude on this treaty, dead on. The other day, in relation to his summing up of the budget, I sent him a telex saying, spot on, good on you, I watched you. Absolutely dead on. But again, there are other things in the past that where their record takes a lot of sort of countering of early days.
But what about as a leader? That's what we're talking
Well,
about.
it's not easy today in the political field to be a leader, because he in his area has people he no sooner says one thing I say about this treaty, he has one or two others who come out and say exactly the opposite. So
doesn't that reflect again how the leaders operate?
Well, it does to an extent. Yes, that wouldn't. Couldn't imagine that happening in our party in my day. Not at all.
So, in other words, then, of all the people around, you wouldn't say there's too much really around at the moment to get excited about.
There's a matter for deep concern right across the board, because there's no real solid, strong party that's united and strong like we were, not like they are today.
What about if you were to look at the opposite end of the political spectrum, say to the Labour Party, is there anybody there that has stood out as a leader to you, who would obviously have directly opposite political views to you, who had the embodiment of what you would see as a leader?
No, not really. I suppose I say that because I don't believe in their philosophy. I don't believe in Hawke's philosophy. I mean, in so many, many ways, this referendum that's coming up by deceit and deception, every one of those we should vote no against. They're very, very simply put, perhaps, but they are very, very sinister and very dangerous. Every one of those should be voted against. And the taxes they have imposed, all these sort of never ends, the fringement of a capital gains tax, superannuation tax, everything they can think of is being taxed. And they're hounding and chasing people out of Australia pretty fast. John Elliott the other day was just one of many that are being driven out of the country simply by virtue of this excessive taxation, trying to equalise everybody down to one level.
So, very simply, on the Labour side, nobody you could really admire as a leader?
No, I would never
All right.
come out with any of them.
As a leader, you've been accused on occasions of not encouraging your ministers to come up through the ranks so that they can ultimately take your position. How do you respond to that?
No, that's not true. Each minister had the opportunity of running his own department completely and utterly. The only thing I monitored them on was in relation to, well, the amount of money they spent, because the cake was only so big and they had to keep within that boundary. And every month we monitored each department to make sure that they did not overspend, because I was determined to keep taxes as low as possible. And that's what's getting out of hand now at the moment, very quickly. They're talking about a lot of new taxes, increased taxes, and so on. It just makes me give a shudder.
Do you subscribe to the theory that a leader is only as good as his team is?
Well, to a degree. And yet again, I think that if you have a good leader, good strong leader, he carries the day. I think people vote more or less on the basis of who the leader is, what his qualifications are, and what they perceive through him. They expect the party to perform, and the leader's job or responsibility is to make sure that his people do perform the way he wanted to perform. Why I wanted to change some of my people at the time.
And it was basically on the basis that they weren't performing?
Well, that, and I'd lost their confidence. I couldn't be quite sure of them. And I could see that. I could see that by their general attitude and by their criticism and so on that was coming more and more out in the media, particularly just a few of them. And when you can't trust people, when their loyalty you feel is no longer with you, there's no purpose in trying to go with them. All the leaks that were coming out of cabinet, all the opposition that we gotten from them, and you can see what's happened to them since. What they themselves has happened to them.
As a leader, how much personal glory did you ever seek in the position of Premier of Queensland?
I never sought any particular glory as Premier at all. Never any time. You ask all the people back home who very affectionately call us Flo and Joh. We're one of them. And no time at any time I've ever put on airs or tempted to put on airs. That would be the last thing I'd want to do. The opportunity of the rank that I ultimately was given was available and offered many times, many, many years before ever I finally agreed and was happy to accept.
The rigours of political office, of being a Premier for nearly 20 years,
yes.
At the age of 77 as you were when you finally finished as a Premier, must have been enormous, the stress, as we've discussed before. How did you keep yourself mentally and physically fit?
Oh, I don't know that there was a I suppose, a degree of stress. But once you've been in politics a long time, I think it's more sadness, as I said, that I felt that our once great party had broken itself up because it just couldn't wait. They just had a burning ambition to get stuck into this new system of living. Live any way you like as long as you take certain precautions. And that they failed to recognise the support I'd given them, the leadership I'd given them, and they just couldn't wait. That to me was very, very disappointing.
But how did you, Sir Joh, keep up with the rigours? Do you have a particular physical exercise program?
Yes, I've always, all my life, I've tried to do a little exercise. I think for the first 4 years, still while I was Premier, I played squash for 1 hour every Wednesday evening. But then, after 4 years, the pressure grew so great and there was so much work to do, I gave it up. But I still did exercises in my room up in the top floor of the annex.
Right.
Every morning, every night, whether it was 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, and when I got up, I always did some exercises and so on to try and keep fit, deep breathing and the rest of it. Because you've got to, otherwise you stagnate and get sluggish.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Joh.
In this 5th interview in the series, Sir Joh has discussed his reliance on his religious beliefs. He stresses that faith is everything, and that a leader without faith has nothing. He even researches the beliefs of other successful leaders. Now, it's interesting to note that Sir Joh said, faith is something you have if you accept it. It's not something you earn or achieve. Sir Joh also believes it's important for a leader to develop the capacity to evaluate people and situations carefully before realising important decisions. And to cope with the stress of making those decisions and following through, he recommends attention not only to your spiritual well-being, but also to your physical health. To Sir Joh, they have equal importance if you're going to be a successful leader. In fact, in his 70s, he still exercises physically on a regular, disciplined basis. So you've decided to learn more about the qualities of leadership. You know, a man who'd been in politics for just 3 years wrote in March 1950, "I'm keen on politics because," and he went on to explain an obsession that led him into the highest political position in Queensland. When Joh Bjelke-Petersen became Premier on August the 8th, 1968, John Gorton was the Prime Minister of Australia, Lyndon Baines Johnson was the United States President, and Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain. Johannes was 57, an age at which most people have retired. Over nearly 20 years, he changed the state dramatically. And in fact, the effects of his leadership should include those he had on a whole nation. Now, whether you admire the man or not, this series of interviews with Sir Joh will help you understand how Johannes became a leader and why his leadership qualities kept him at the top for longer than Gorton, Baines Johnson or Wilson.
Sir Joh, the brickbats and the vilification that you personally have taken from the media, your opponents in politics and others, How do you find it so easy to hide your feelings? You must be hurt, surely.
No, I think it's a matter of you expect it. You'd be surprised if they didn't come. And when you expect them, well, you let them slide over your shoulder, or like water on a duck's back. As I used to say to Gough Whitlam when he was Prime Minister, he used to say to me sometimes, "Joh, why are you always attacking me?" He said, "I never attack you. Why do you do that to me?" I said, "I'm not attacking you, I'm attacking your policies." And so I accepted in that way. If they attack me, they're really after my policies, after my job, or whatever you like to term it. Or they want to become Premier or get into power, if it's the Labor people. These sort of things.
So in other words, a leader should never take an attack or a vilification personally.
Well, you'd never last very long if you did. See, the whole history of Queensland shows that the average life of a Premier is 3 years and less. 3 years and less. I went for nearly 20. So it's pretty good. So the others didn't survive very long for different reasons. Now, to survive for well, the 19 and a half years or more, then you would never survive if you took you know, let it eat into you, and it would destroy you. And you don't do that. You just walk over it, past it, go on to the next thing.
Similarly,
yes,
a leader's life must be a very lonely one at times.
Yes, it is quite lonely in some respects, because you cop most of the abuse, you cop all the criticism, and generally, or most of it, on behalf of your ministers and so on. And so you are, as it were, on your own. But yet again, you know, you have your colleagues and others that are supporting you. You have the organisational people, the rank and file, the good ones, and that are there backing you and supporting you. And that means a lot too. The rank and file, and I'd like to pay tribute to the rank and file that have helped me to stay there. Pay tribute to the people in my electorate who have voted for me, given me 70–80% of the vote most of my life for nearly 40 years. Unbelievable. And to these people I owe a great debt. I couldn't have done the things I do without them.
However, that's the very point I'm about to make, that during the last few weeks of your administration, when you were deserted by your cabinet colleagues, by numbers of other people, the party organisation and the like, you must have felt especially lonely then. No,
I didn't feel lonely at all, in the sense of feeling lonely. It's not a matter of feeling lonely. I was pretty disgusted. As I said, I was sad because I realised that our party would go to pieces and go downhill, and the 2 by-elections showed that very, very conclusively. The third one probably will. That's the part that after 40 years of effort and work, and I put in an enormous amount even when we were in opposition, as I was for 10 years, and then as a backbencher for 6 years in government, 16 years before I became a minister. And so when you think of all that work and all that labour, and as it were, in a moment of time, because of irresponsible actions of certain people, that it could all ultimately, gradually disappear.
So the mark of a good leader then would be to have the ability to cope with the criticism and not take it personally, as well as cope with the loneliness.
Well, yes, I've never sort of felt lonely in the sense of being lonely. I've perhaps been too busy and pushing ahead with other things. But to accept the criticism, particularly when you know it's not true criticism. And I may say in here that the thing that frightens me, and why I say to John, my son, I said it to him at the weekend. He came down home at last Saturday and Sunday. And I said to John, John, I don't want you to go into Parliament. It is too dirty and hard today to be in politics. You will be accused of everything. That is not true. As I said on another program this morning, if I was drinking a cup of tea, 9 times out of 10 somebody would accuse me of the tea that was in that cup of tea had been stolen or given to me as a bribe for something else. That's an illustration of what I mean. It doesn't seem to matter what it is. And the lying in politics today is out of this world. The Labor people specialise in it. And I say that deliberately. They specialise in it so often. Not all of them. There's some good people there. But our Prime Minister again and again has pulled our leg by saying there won't be a capital gains tax and all the rest of it. We know the story. So it deceives people. It's untrue. And this is the thing that is hard to come to grips with when you find that they're lying. These charges of corruption that every minister, every almost member of Parliament has been charged by corruption by the Labour Party, with no evidence, nothing to substantiate it whatsoever.
So in other words...
these are the things that make it hard, yes.
So in other words, Sir Joh, a good leader would have to have a lot of patience and a lot of understanding and a lot of...
Not a lot of patience.
Not a lot of patience?
No, he'd have to have a lot of ability to believe that people wouldn't believe what is being said about him and his government.
Right.
And when I say government, I mean members of Parliament.
And a person perhaps who doesn't allow their emotions to run too heavily, because obviously enough I would imagine that it'd be very easy if you're an emotional person to get pulled into that terrible situation of being hurt too easily, sensitive perhaps.
Yes, I'm fairly sensitive in lots of ways, but I still, on the other hand, would never allow that sort of thing to sort of get under my skin. I can go to sleep after the most tumultuous day in the house or whatever, and go to sleep straight away. Sleep my 4 or 5 hours, that's a limit that I put on myself, and go into the habit I wake without an alarm on that basis, and we do that and survive. But that's never been difficult to go to sleep after a day, because you know in your own mind it's not true, things that have been said and things that of which you may have been accused.
A lot of credibility has been put on people now voting for the leader and not necessarily the party.
Yes.
Hence, of course, you now have a lot of comment about the charismatic qualities of a leader. How important do you think charisma is for a leader now?
I guess it is an advantage if you've got something like that. Some say, you know, the Prime Minister, for example, I've never been able to see it. And he could say the same about me, but not that I say that I have. But all I know is a leader, it relates a lot to policy, what you stand for, how the type of leadership you've given. Are you strong? Are you weak? Do you waffle? Do you have to run around asking everybody before you can make a decision? Or do you make decisions and then stick to them? Or do you make decisions and then your party supports you? We've always done that in my cabinet in my day. That when I make a commitment, that's the commitment of half of the government, and we stick to it. But today in Canberra, the Prime Minister or others, they can make commitments but then find they're overturned. The MS missile, for example, when he had to do a somersault and reverse his attitude.
So what you're saying is then the policies have to be strong, charisma is not necessarily the...
Well, it's part of it, but unfortunately I think today it plays too big a part in the lives of a lot of people, how they vote. If they like a fellow, if he can go and play football or play golf and be sort of one of the fellows around the ridges and while the country's going to ruin, or somebody else is doing a job, they overlook that fact and think, oh, gee, he's a jolly good fellow and he's all the best and so on.
But that doesn't speak very highly of the Australian electorate, Sir Joh.
No, and I've got to say this, that they're easily fooled by a lot of times by some of this sort of stuff. Instead of the good, hard, honest, straightforward policies, you take my single rate tax, for example, the best thing that could have ever happened to this nation, but still because of certain, well, appeal, if you like to put it, by certain people in the federal arena, they couldn't see past or see the benefit of some of the things that were offered at that occasion.
Do you think in this case the media were to blame, perhaps to some degree?
Well, I would say to the extent they play a part, yes, they do their best to pull you down, and that's quite true, very, very true. Very, very hard to get anything positive. Single rate tax, I heard very little of benefit at any time in the media about it, but when the fellow in New Zealand came in with a much less beneficial type of single rate tax, I noticed one of the Australian papers came out and said, what a fantastic idea, what a wonderful idea. I'd been promoting it for over 12 months, and at the election, at that time it was, you know, nothing worth bothering to support or otherwise.
If you'd been successful in your Joh for PM campaign, apart from the flat tax initiative, what other initiatives would you have brought in?
Well, my campaign wasn't a campaign in the sense of being Prime Minister. My campaign was to go down there to do something. It was the organisation here that put that sort of slogan out. It wasn't to be Prime Minister, it was to go down there and do a good job, and that was to ease the burden of taxes and to readjust, to eliminate the fringe benefit tax, the capital gains tax, the South African policy tax, the Qantas tax, the Qantas policies. Let other planes come in and out. They want to come in and out. At the moment they're stopped because of Qantas. Continental Airways 12 months ago had to cancel 3 flights a week into Sydney, into Queensland, because they were carrying too many people. It's still going on, still going on. We suffer enormously. That policy, there's a whole stack of them. I had listed every hour of the day for months what the decisions in the line of attitudes in adoption attitude we take. Land rights would have been stopped immediately. Land that's not being utilised, but is being neutralised. If it wasn't used, we'd have to go back to the Commonwealth. These sort of things. You can't. There are a lot of decisions that had all been mapped out, ready to be implemented. And the attitude of militant unions, making them obey the law, not defying the courts, not threatening the industrial court like they're doing. Unbelievable. The industrial court must feel absolutely humiliated and sort of a non-event the way the unions treat them, the way they accept it. All those things had to be stopped, and they had to be applied, the one law for all people.
As an ex-leader now, are you optimistic about Australia and its future?
I have a lot of doubts and a lot of concerns. I really have. I've said it many times, deep concerns. We find the breaking down of the attitude towards, well, the Soviet, the communists. I know we've got to sort of live with them, and we do. But when you think in terms of the treaties they want to make in relation to fishing, to use of all our ports and facilities, these are things that concern me very, very, very deeply indeed. Because the National and the Labour Party, the ALP, have the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the left, the right, the majority, old guard, new guard, all these factions. You can't have a good government on a cracked foundation. You can't build a house on a cracked foundation. And all these things, in spite of all the talk and playing around by the Labour people in Canberra, you cannot have a good government. You have a matter of deep concern. The unions direct the policy, control the government. Here you have it, as we saw in the conference at Hobart, a government elected by the people being told by the rank and file of all these factions what they could do, what they can't do, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. Completely wrong. Why do we have an election? Why do we bother with putting people into Parliament when the rank and file of all these factions make the decisions for the government?
So in other words, what you're suggesting is then that the country is leaderless?
Well, it isn't receiving the leadership that it should. It is not receiving the leadership it should. As I said at the very first summit, you cannot have a good government on a cracked foundation like you can't build a building on a cracked foundation, like you have all these factions. And you find the Prime Minister shifting from one to the other, and all the decisions that he has to change on the mining of uranium. Yes, we can. No, we won't. We're going to reduce taxes to 39%. No, you're not going to do it. The unions won't let it. And all this sort of stuff. Where does it take us? Why do we have them as a government? They're not the government as they should be.
What advice would you give young aspiring politicians and young businessmen and women who would aspire to leadership? What advice would you give them?
I give them, first of all, don't get into the Labour Party. And secondly, because they're on they got all the mix and the brew that nobody else wants. That's all in there. And how can you have run a good government? It nearly drives them dilly around the bend, as you can see by the Prime Minister and all the rest. Trying to.
What concrete advice, Sir Joh, would you give these young people as to things they should be considering?
Well, it's very, very difficult. As I said to you, while we need good men in there and strong men, as I said to John, there's so much lying. There's so much attempts by political opponents to destroy their opponents, not on policy issues, but by making all sorts of accusations that are not true. And it is politics today in Australia is a very, very low ebb, and is indeed very, very well in a precarious situation, the system itself, when you can do the things that they do, when you can promise one thing and do another, and play around with the public and deceive the people like they do, that's being deceived. Then I think it's a very, very, very difficult situation to advise people what to do. Strong men we need there, but until the media and others are prepared to give them some support and recognise the seriousness of the situation that confronts Australia today, I tell you, in my opinion, and I don't say it because I'm out of politics necessarily, I've always been deeply concerned with this matter of the Labor government making a treaty. Can you imagine anything more dangerous, or more disastrous, or more treacherous to the Australian people if they did that? to the nation, and this talk of the former owners and all the rest. What happens to all the other countries around the world? Do they hand them all back to the previous owners and all the rest of it?
You're questioning again the leadership, though, aren't you? That's really where it's coming back.
Well, it's coming there. The leadership is wrong. He's going in the wrong direction. And when you get wrong leadership, the whole organisation, of course, gets into jeopardy, and its policies are, well, suspect.
If I could touch on one other aspect. As a leader, you've been known nationally as a survivor.
Yes.
Probably the best-known survivor in Australia's political history, perhaps.
Sure.
You've had two challenges, 1970 and 1987, to your leadership. You've had various other activities that have gone in your 19 and a half years as Premier.
Yeah.
What do you singularly identify up until, say, the events of late 1987? What single events do you identify as being the keys to your ability to survive?
Well, I don't know if there's any particular keys to it. I think it's I guess the day when we got strong enough to change our name to the National Party, and then when we became a government in our own right. And then when I then automatically became the Premier, the Treasurer of the state as well as Premier of the state. Right. They were key issues that helped me to survive even much longer. And they were all moves and strategies that, if I told them in detail, they would intrigue you and interest you, how that was achieved and the planning and that went in. I didn't even tell my cabinet ministers a lot of that strategy. I wouldn't tell them because it would leak. I couldn't help telling. So I told them nothing about the strategy, that how we became a government in our own right, what led up to it, and the whole situation. The Parliament was sitting when the Liberal Party walked out on us. The strategy that I employed, of which I told nobody. The Vince Gere affair that stopped Hawke Whitlam from getting control of the federal government completely. And so on. All these things are all strategies that we've worked out and played a big important part of keeping me before my own colleagues, strengthening my own position, no doubt, and so on. But general policies and attitudes and private enterprise and support we've had in the state has all given a background and support, as I said, backed by my own electorate and the people of this state who voted so strongly for me.
I can't help but think, in talking with you now for the period of time we have, that given the right scenario, Sir Joh, if somebody was to come tomorrow and say to you, Sir Joh, we formed a new political party, we'd like you to lead it, what would be the response? I
would say I get that offer every week, at least once every week. We get people say there are a whole lot of parties want to start, and there's a lot of appeal in that. There's a lot of appeal in that, to get away from a party system that we've got now today, where you have one or two individuals or half a dozen individuals who more or less dominate the political scene.
Yes.
And it's exactly what happened to the Labor Party, which destroyed the Labor Party. I was there, I went through it. And if I hadn't resigned and stuck to my guns as Premier like Gere did, we'd have split the party and it would have been finished already. I stepped aside mainly at that time to prevent that situation. And so today, well, the whole situation is not a very happy one.
You're now back in private enterprise.
Yes.
The wheel has turned its full circle.
Yes, that's right.
What does the future hold for Sir Joh?
Well, the future is an interesting one. Many opportunities. There are many more opportunities out there than I suppose the average person would suspect. Again, the decision is, which one do you take, which way do you go? In the meantime, I'm, well, just going along quietly, carefully, but at the same time watching which way I may ultimately go.
Why not accept the role that people, I'm sure, in your party would like to see you take, and that's as the elder statesman, and sit back and...
If I'd had good confidence in the party that I had in days gone by and the leadership, I like the people. The rank and file of the National Party people are wonderful people. But the people in management, not all of them, some of them, are people that should no longer be there. The leader of the party, the leader of the parliamentary party should no longer be there, and I would never in a million years even dream of wanting to be the elder statesman of a party being led by these few people. They are people who ought to resign in the interest of the party, and they ought to recognise that they were the ones at fault. They were the ones that should have been put out at the end of November last year. And then the party would have still been strong and positive. But because of the attitudes that they have adopted, which are are not in the interest of the party. But there it is. These things have happened. And there's no way in the world I'd ever want to be an elder statesman of a party that has gone down the policies and the way they've gone. No way.
In summary, we've talked about leadership qualities. If I might just rehash some of them again to identify them more clearly.
Yeah.
You identified obviously very much the need a leader to be able to seek and find new opportunities, to identify new opportunities, perhaps to take risks, make the decision. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think I saw the opportunity and the need to do something during the great electricity power strike. I saw there an opportunity to get control of these militant leaders, just a handful of them, who were wrecking the state and the nation, and thinking they had all
when
power.
You say control, how do you mean control?
Well, they control the putting on of power and light, and they controlled the lives of people as a consequence. They had enormous power that they shouldn't have. They had no right to have. They were not elected to government. They shouldn't do the things they did. I saw that opportunity, and I seized it, and I stuck to it, and we succeeded. And so you could go from opportunity to opportunity. And as I said, on another occasion, the coal deals overseas, I saw a great opportunity to get into a new market, bigger than the Japanese market, and I seized that one. Or the opportunity of the space station, which is going to be twice the size and money of Expo, or Expo itself.
So you see a leader being perhaps an entrepreneur?
Yes, you have to be. You have to be a real businessman, like a businessman going out chasing business on behalf of not yourself or your directors, but of the people of this state, who are, I suppose, the shareholders.
What about being an organiser, and in fact being organised in your own work habits and so forth yourself?
Well, if you're not a born organiser, you won't make a good Premier, that's sure. You've got to be a top organiser. You've got to have the ability to organise yourself, to be an organised person, to be on time, to work long hours, to adapt yourself to all these situations that confront a Premier. And yes, you have to be a born organiser. That was one of my specialities during contracting days, when I had to organise the shifting of a lot of equipment all over the state in different places. And you have to be super good at it. And to succeed, you have to, exactly the same as a Premier, you have to be, well, a top organiser in your running of the departments and who runs them and how they run. You've got to supervise it.
The ability to gain loyalty, but surely there's a reverse to that. It's all very well to have loyalty coming to you, but surely you've got to get loyalty, give loyalty.
Yes, this is true. I've always given loyalty. I'm a great believer in loyalty. I think that is, if you can't be loyal to those who are around you, then you're not worth even going across the road to say good day to. That's
and you're talking about support for them.
Yes. If I can't, I've always been extremely loyal, probably over loyal, and in support of people. Many, many times over the years, I've, what you might say, stuck my head out to support people, and just because of my loyalty, not because perhaps I hadn't all the evidence at the time.
I raised the business of belief in yourself. You questioned me a little on that one. You didn't quite perhaps...
Oh, well, I did question you on the basis that belief in yourself. I didn't want to give the impression that I thought I was somebody great and somebody special, and therefore I should be as Premier and so on. You have to have a faith in yourself. You have to believe and know that you can stand up against enormous pressure, criticism and ridicule, pressure to make you change your mind. That's going on all the time. You have to have confidence in yourself and what you're doing, that's sure. I didn't mean it that way.
Academics and certain academics, I should say, not all, certain academics and in fact certain textbooks say that as a good manager, leader, whatever, you should always have at least 2 people trained up, ready to take over the leadership from you. How do you feel about that?
I would say that's the greatest load of hogwash you could think of. I have too much to do as Premier, to say to you and to you, you do this and do that and be ready and so on. I give you the opportunity. I put ministers, 16 of them in there, top positions. There were 19 of us altogether, and then we had, well, 1 or 2 out at different times. But by and large, there are all those people, 18 of them, that have an opportunity towards the end to be a Premier. they have the opportunity, they're given full reins, it's up to them to perform, and it's up to the party then to decide which one of the two. It wasn't my job to say, you are going to be my deputy and you were going to be the next one.
On the other hand, you'll help develop them, I assume.
I did, because I gave them many opportunities. I gave them all the support they needed, publicly, and great opportunity. But I wouldn't be humbugged trying to train them. If they couldn't train themselves with the opportunity they had, they weren't worth being leaders.
So in other words, it does get down to the man whether he has the ability to be a leader or not.
He's got to plough his own furrow. I ploughed mine and I gave them the line and the direction and the course and the policies. It was him to follow.
Thank you very much, Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In the 6th interview in this series, Sir Joh has discussed the ability not to take criticism personally where politics and business are concerned. He says criticism is all part and parcel of being a leader. Negative thinking doesn't come into his philosophy, and worrying over personal criticism creates negative thinking. He says go past it and get on with the next plan or objective. Sir Joh also believes in building on a strong foundation, but to do this a leader must have researched thoroughly, he must have his facts clear, and he must believe in what he's doing. Then once a decision has been made, he says he commits himself 100%. Another key to Sir Joh's rise to the top of his chosen career has surely been that he always thinks positively. He strives to give loyalty and to earn it in return, and he believes in taking a special interest in those who help him and support him, no matter what decisions he makes. On training and development, Sir Joh says he prefers to give others the opportunity to take their own initiatives. And remembering what you've already learned about Sir Joh's philosophy of faith, hard work and forward thinking, it should be easy to understand what he means. Give others the opportunity to take their own initiatives. He believes in giving people his support, but he also thinks they should be allowed to develop through experience. No doubt he would add again, with faith, forward planning, hard work, and the strength to commit yourself 100%. When Sir Joh says develop through experience, you must remember Sir Joh is a self-taught person, and he makes no apologies for it. He says, seize the opportunity, stay with it, and believe you'll succeed.
Hello, I'm Richard Lancaster. The first 6 Joh tapes on leadership were recorded in late August 1988, some 3 months before Sir Joh's appearance at the Fitzgerald Inquiry. The purpose of these tapes was to identify the unique leadership style and qualities that kept Sir Joh in power for nearly 20 years as Premier of Queensland. This often enigmatic and controversial ex-leader appeared before the inquiry for 7 days in early December 1988. During those 7 days, questions relating to the effectiveness of his leadership were raised. The producers felt that in light of the matters raised in relation to his leadership, it was important to review the contents of the 6 tapes. The 7th tape seeks to answer some of these questions. Care has been exercised in framing these questions, for although the public sittings of the inquiry have now finished, the inquiry and the resultant findings are as yet incomplete. Good evening, Sir Joh.
Good evening. Good evening.
There's been a lot of water flow under the bridge since you and I sat down some 3.5 months ago and recorded the 6 Joh tapes on leadership.
Yes, there's been a lot of turbulent water go under the bridge since that time, sure.
The media particularly have been very, very critical of you. They've been critical of your leadership. They've suggested that you've been less than an effective leader since the period of recording those first 6 Joh tapes. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to it by saying that some of the media, as you indicated, not all by a long way, but because of their political attitudes and thinking and their whole actions down the years indicating that they would do exactly that, and they are running true to form. That's the bad part about the media, that they can't divorce themselves from their own political thinking.
But
and
all
I see
media,
that so often.
Are you suggesting all media are that way?
No, I don't suggest all media at all, but I do suggest that a lot of media ought to take a good, hard look at their organisations, the media people at the top, and they ought to pull up their socks. They ought to realise that if they talk about the liberty of the press, the freedom and the liberty and all the rest of it, they've also got a very, very big responsibility that they completely ignore in relation to the truth. And the way the media are going, and some of them, and in a decade or two, they won't be having their freedom because people will not continue to tolerate the blatant misuse of the power and the privilege they have and have retained up to this point in time in order so that they can, well, use it as a machine or a tool to denigrate people, to try and destroy people. It's just not on.
Are you suggesting then that the reporting of recent times on the inquiry was in fact one-eyed?
A lot of it was. A lot of it was disgusting, disgraceful, despicable, and completely unrealistic and untrue. And it was slanted in a way either by the way or the words that were used or by eliminating a lot that would indicate the true position. And I saw that day after day, night after night. And I think it was despicable the way they criticised, as it were, and ridiculed, made to look silly, the Commission itself, the people in the Commission. Quite wrong.
But going back to this leadership issue,
yes,
surely people, the community, read the newspapers, watched television, listened to the radio, and they heard day after day for 7 days comments that were certainly must have made your leadership now very gravely suspect.
Well, I'm not interested in that side of the media that attempts to destroy, to ridicule and to pull down. And I think most of the people of this state and the nation, knowing me as I have for the last, well, 20 years particularly, and many for the whole 41 years that I have been before them, but particularly since the advent of TV, they would not be influenced, and they are not influenced. And the volume of mail that I'm receiving now at the moment indicates their contempt for the media that have tried to, well, use the opportunity that was given them by the open court to, well, display their own political bias, whatever you like to term it.
But surely, getting back to this leadership issue, you cannot get away from the fact that there are instances that have been shown of recent times which indicate that your administration must have been in question. You've got a minister admitting to tax problems. You've got policemen admitting to corruption. Now, how do you answer that? That's your administration, surely.
Well, that's not my administration. I didn't administer that sort of operation. I administered a progressive, forward, planning, thinking operation that brought thousands and thousands of people to this state every year. And it made and helped Queensland to grow and expand as it had never grown and expanded before. What we now learn has been going on for 30 or more years. Has always been there, and now, of course, has come to the surface. That's regrettable that this situation did exist. But no one can blame you or me or anybody else.
But that has come out in the 30 or so years, nearly 20 of which you were Premier. Surely you can now, or you must admit, that because 2/3 of that period of time was under your administration, you were the leader.
Well, I'll give you a very interesting illustration if you want one. What about taking it the other way? What are the good things that happened in those 20 years? The amazing things that happened this year, the growth and expansion that no other state achieved. Expo, which I was the one that launched and brought forward under great ridicule and opposition from my own colleagues at one time, the space station, which they ridicule, a whole lot of other things that have happened, the elimination of death duties and gift duties. Think of all the good things, the way that employment has been generated to an amazing degree. That's the important part of what one's life and one's...
In saying think of the good things, then you're admitting there are bad things.
Well, there is good and bad in everything. In a case of apples, you'll find one or two that's bad. And indeed, amongst a group of people, amongst the media. And everywhere you find some pretty bad ones, I can tell you that.
Okay, that's a good way for me to lead into my next question then.
Yes.
If indeed you're the greengrocer selecting your apples,
Yes.
you surely do check those apples to make sure they're good and wholesome before you sell them. So therefore, going back to the 6 tapes again that we did before, you laid heavy stress on the selection of good people to do the job.
Yes, this is true. You indicated that I went and picked good apples and so on. Yes, but you always know that if you put apples in a case and leave them there for a little while, and these people have been there for many, many years, some of the apples go bad, and some of the men have gone bad. It's very simple explanation of that. I did pick good men. I did pick good apples, if you like to put them in that category. And today, of course, we know some of them, or some of the people, wherever it might have been, whichever category, are not the people that were put in originally.
So in other words, do you admit then to power corrupts?
No, I do not admit that at all. Power does not corrupt. People corrupt themselves by, or get into that positions by allowing themselves, but that's not, power doesn't do it. Power, as it were, does good things, as we have seen, as I've mentioned. All the roads, all the bridges, all the huge dams, the Burdekin, the Wivenhoe Dam, all these thousands and one things that have happened and generated, they've resulted because of the power of a government, of a collective system of operation. And under the Westminster system of government. We were a government in all the decisions that came up in the inquiry recently, the contracts, they were all government decisions. They weren't just mine. The media tried to make out that it was mine.
Why do you think they were doing that, though? Why do you think the media have got such a down on?
Because they are bad apples. Because they are bad apples themselves.
They can't be all bad apples, Sir Joh, surely.
They're not all bad apples. And as I said before, only some of the media. You can liken them that simply because they do not report fully, honestly or truthfully, distort, do all sorts of things. If I was in their place, I could do the same thing, and others could do the same thing.
Do you think they had it down on you, do you?
Well, I know they didn't love me because they didn't like National Party policies. They didn't like Liberal Party policies. They were socialists or whatever. I once said to them, a group of media, about 40 of them, if you want me to, I will tell you how every one of you people vote. I can tell it very simply, very easy. And they said, no, we don't want you to do that. I said, you know jolly well, but I could work it out by the way you slant your reporting all the time. You've done it week in, week out, month after month, year after month. Now, that is wrong. That is where the media, some of them, only some of them, just, well, fall down very, very much on their jobs. Not the government as such that has well, been perhaps to a degree unfortunate in that these things happened under them. But the media people, they can see it every day. They can read it. The top people, I mean, that run these organisations, they ought to know that a lot of the reporting. Their argument to me is they don't get time to report. I said, you just give me a ring and I'll tell you the true story, and give you the facts. They said, that would spoil our story. We can't afford that.
But getting back to the leadership issue, do you believe as a leader you must shoulder the ultimate responsibility of a government? You're the leader.
Of a government,
The buck stops here.
Well, yes, as the leader of a government, of all the things we did, I didn't do these things about the corrupt things that some have been doing or involved in. I didn't do that. I'm not responsible for that. I am responsible for the things that the government initiated and did. That's where I'm responsible. And I'm glad to say that I accept the full responsibility for that period and that area of activity. Not for the area of activity that I didn't sponsor or didn't support. I didn't.
Do you admit you've made mistakes?
No, I don't admit it unless you can tell me one. I don't know. I've always said this down the years, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. We know that but we know this, I know this, that I did everything I believed was right and good and proper and necessary under the system of government. I knew that we had to, well, be firm, be strong, be positive, because society had drifted into a completely impossible situation where some people believed that they had the right to interfere with the lives of others. Well, in the street marches, knock-off time, and the withholding of power and these sort of things. And the government, my government, the government I led, we did the amazing thing of keeping the power and the lights on ever since those early days when we had the real problems. And today, in my time, I always guaranteed these things would stay on because they're public necessities.
Getting back to picking the people.
Yes.
The apples in the barrel.
Yes.
The greengrocer exercise.
Yeah.
You picked the right people for the job, as you say. You trust them enormously.
Yes, you do.
Do you think, in hindsight now, you trusted people too much?
No, I didn't. Simply in one sense you could say yes, in the other sense you say no. I trusted people and I believed that they were expected and required and fully implemented the work they had honestly and accurately. Now, I wouldn't know what they did after they left me or after they left their office. Nobody would know but themselves and perhaps one or two others. And this is where these people, they were the people who went wrong, not me in trusting them. You can't say because I trusted people that therefore I was responsible.
But as a good leader,
yes,
as a manager of a business or a leader, you pick the right people, you trust them to do the job, but surely you as a good leader ensure that there are checks and balances in place to monitor performance, monitor that trust that you've placed in them.
Sure.
Don't you do that?
We did that all the time. Exactly as in Frank Nicholas' day. We had standards, we had guidelines in relation to each minister and in the requirement to, well, notify Cabinet if they had some interest somewhere in some particular area or members of their family. We did those sort of things. We also required each department had an auditor, one man and a group of people in one section of my department, the Premier's department, every other department, that monitored everything that went on in relation to the expenditure of money and so on. And we had the Auditor General, and all these checks and balances were there. They were in place, and yet, as you know, banks can be robbed, and that goes on nearly every day. And in spite of all the precautions they've taken, in spite of all the security and so on, they still rob them. And in spite of all the things that we did as a government to ensure that everything was carried out correctly, there were things happening. Now, you remember when all the members, many of the members of the Parliament, I think in all the parties, started to cash their airline tickets and do those sort of things. I told them when I learnt about it that had to cease immediately. A lot of them objected. I said, we'll have to get the police in to investigate what you are doing. And then I did get in the Auditor General. As a result of that, we cleaned up that whole terrible mess through the Peel report. Jim Peel, who was the Auditor General at the time, he carried out a very thorough investigation and all that came to an end. And so where we saw and where we heard and where we learnt there was something wrong, we took action. I took action immediately, always, and we did it very effectively. But what's happened recently, of course, and even the Commissioner of the day, Mr. Whitrod, he was there 7 years. He walked over them nearly, he fell over them, he bumped into them in the corridor, and he had to admit that he couldn't find anything wrong with Lewis or any of them. He said that that evidence as I presented in a document to the court recently.
Do you think you're known as universally and certainly Australia nationally as the man that promoted Queensland?
Sure, I did.
You spent a great deal of time travelling across the country, travelling internationally, doing deals, promoting the state and so forth. Do you think you really spent far too much time doing that and not getting back to administering and being head of administration of the government? No, no, no. I was very close in touch with the administration, even if I was overseas. I only went overseas for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days at the most, and I was back again. And the rapid travel and the means of transport that we initiated were good and were effective. And apart from that, we had our own officers, we had our own Deputy Premier. The odd days I was away, but most of my life I was here in Queensland,
Most of the cabinet meetings I was always present. Just towards the end I missed a few, not very many. And so at the Parliament House, I very, very rarely missed a day in Parliament House all those many, many years, 41 years. No, I was very close in touch with everything. I knew the general administration very, very well and very effectively.
Were you a leader who would rather eliminate or avoid a difficult problem? In other words, if you knew a major political problem was coming up that could embarrass you or whatever, you'd slide it quickly under the carpet and say, let's forget about that.
No, I think I'm pretty well known for not doing those sort of things. I never run away from a problem. I was the only member of Parliament or ex-minister or Premier who volunteered to go before the Commission. None of the others volunteered, said, I'll be happy to go along. Joh Bjelke-Petersen was right at the beginning, said, I will go any time they call me. I waited for 6 months from the time they first called me till when they finally did call me. Sat here in Brisbane most of the time waiting for that day. None of the others did that. They put some submissions in, but they kept away from it, from being interviewed.
You spoke on an earlier tape about your concern of the freedom of the press.
Sure, I did.
Talk to me some more about that. Tell me, how do you really feel about it?
I feel that the days of this much vaunted, that freedom is tied up with the freedom of the press, freedom of the community. Those days are all but over as I see it, and I know very well because people are getting jack of the media the way they misrepresent the facts. You can talk to the average citizen and they will tell you they don't believe half they read, and I know that that's dead right so often. And misrepresented.
The other half do believe what they read.
Well, they do, but that percentage is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And there are many people saying they don't bother looking at the news or the media generally or reading the papers because they are so sick of being told things that they know, for example, are not correct or true. Now, that's where the freedom of the press is getting into a position of great danger.
So what do you suggest then?
Well, I suggest that there's got to, the media people, the head of the organisations, the various ones, have got to take a jolly good close look at themselves because they're not going to be allowed, as it were, in the next number of years or decades, to be allowed to play around and operate the way they do. They handle the truth exceedingly carelessly, purposely and deliberately.
That's a very serious accusation.
Yes, it is a very serious accusation. But you take my own case recently before the Commission. It was absolutely disgusting and disgraceful the way they tried to represent what was just an ordinary commercial transaction. That one relating to the disposal of those clay deposits that I'd held and spent much more money on than we'd ever thought of or able to receive at this point of time. And that was completely misconstrued. It was a straight-out commercial operation that the people walked away from. But that wasn't the way it was presented to the public.
How do you think it was presented to the public?
Well, it was presented to look as if I got a large sum of money by skullduggery.
Did you?
No, of course we didn't. It was a straight-out commercial proposition, an operation, and my accountants and my legal people who handle it all, I didn't handle it. You ask them; they'll soon tell you.
What about though? I mean, look, let's go back, Sir Joh, and remember bags and sacks of money being left in your office.
Nobody knows whether they were dumped in the office, as you term it, or were they raised by individuals or party members.
But it was reported in the media that they were dropped in your office.
Well, they made that thing look silly, no doubt. But it is cold, hard fact. As I indicated to the Commission, I wasn't sitting there trying to count money or collect money. That came automatically, as it does to the Liberal Party, as it does to the Labor Party, exactly the same. Large
no accounting, nothing.
No, the only accounting I think you get is when the Labor Party pinch at the union dues. When they get $100,000 or so from the unions and this union and that union, we're the only parties, the Liberal and the National, that have to raise their money. I don't go raising it, people bring it, simply because they're private enterprise people. They support me and the policies that we've had, and they support me very, very strongly. And they were determined that we would get the funds to keep a private enterprise government going.
So you expect the public of Queensland to believe that people would come up to your office or come wherever with a sack full of money or whatever it might be and give you and leave that money at an office or at an environment and walk off and not expect any acknowledgement at all?
Well, the whole system, you could say, works that way. People donate money to a party, whether it comes through the office or goes direct to the account.
And they don't expect kickbacks if they
No,
do.
they don't expect kickbacks. That doesn't happen, as I said to the Commissioner. It has never happened in my life, in any shape or form, to me or any part of my family. Not a tenth of a cent, as I said to them. Now, that's pretty insulting after the fact that I walked away from more than $1 million in superannuation. I wouldn't touch it. I said I didn't go into politics to make money and to go away with a big sum of money. And I gave a lot of my salary away at different times. And I also, well, used my aeroplane free for over 12 months before the government was prepared to buy an aeroplane. I never charged for the use of my aircraft, which I flew myself. Now, all these sort of things, plus 100 others, the fact that we work twice as long as most people work every day, put an enormous effort and time into it. I didn't do these things. I wanted to serve the people, not to go away with a lot of money. And so the whole thing is...
So you say all that personal stuff was just mudslinging?
Oh, that was just on the part of the socialist part of the media, the Labour part of the media. Obviously, I know them pretty well. I know who ran those programs, and I think you can work it out yourself too.
Let's just stay on that point, though, that you, in going before the inquiry and the personal accusations that were levelled at you, you're no longer a politician. Why should the media, and indeed perhaps the Labour Party or whoever, want to denigrate you still further? You're finished.
Well,
You've had
sure,
you're
out of politics, but they keep bringing me back into politics, and I think
Why do you think they do that?
Well, they're still perhaps worried that I can be a force at the next election, which I can very easily if I want to be, and no doubt will be.
So you think they want to bury you now?
Well, they want to bury me. They've tried to bury me, and the other angle, of course, is all their lives they've tried to sort of get on top of me, and they've never been able to. They've been made to look a little bit foolish so often. And now they thought they had a good opportunity in this inquiry where nobody could sort of question them or ridicule them or do anything about it. And so they went for their lives. And they had a field day. And they made themselves look silly. And indeed, I think they did a discredit to the inquiry itself.
Do you think that your acknowledged style of entrepreneurial government, you talked in an earlier tape, in fact, about a political leader needs to be an entrepreneur, a businessman. Do you think that very style, in fact, encourages people to manipulate the system?
Manipulate the system? I don't know what you mean by manipulate the system. You can manipulate the system, whether it's a Labour government or whatever. In Hanlon's day, in my day, I was 10 years in the Hanlon government and the Gare government, and they had 3 huge scandals, far, far bigger than anything that's coming up now as far as the inquiry is concerned. In another sense, they had a great big tobacco scandal, and that would take too long to explain it. They also had a great big scandal when everything was leasehold land in the state and people had to come in and get their leases renewed, left money on the table or in a drawer.
But we're talking
These
about
are things,
here and now, Sir Joh.
I'm talking about, it happens under every political party. The Redcliffe scandal. Scandal after scandal in Hanlon's day, and I was there, I saw it. It doesn't relate just to one government.
What I'm getting at is that because you are entrepreneurial by nature, you're an entrepreneur. You've done it so many times in your private life and so forth that you believe in private enterprise.
Sure, I do.
Now, because you believe in private enterprise, do you think that in fact encourages people who perhaps are not necessarily as honest as they should be in business? Does it encourage them to do things that are not perhaps good for the community and good for themselves?
No, I wouldn't say so at all. That was why I gave the illustration of the 3 very, very large inquiries into corruption in the Labour day. There was an entirely different policy, a more socialistic policy, though not as much as today. And it happened there. It happens in New South Wales. There's a Member of Parliament in jail down there. And there's all the scandal that they had there. And then Adelaide, Western Australia, Victoria, they've all been there. They're all different sorts of governments. No, it happens because human nature is what it is, and because today we are going into a period where there's no real moral guidance or standards. People have tried to destroy, and the federal people have been very much to the fore in setting standards that are not of a nature that demand high moral attitudes towards all things in all walks of life. It's sad to relate, but the falling apart of families, and attitudes and to his spiritual things all indicate that people are getting lost and go astray, and when they do that they get involved in these other areas.
In an earlier tape again you talk about the so-called kitchen cabinet. People who advised you very closely, or perhaps not advised you, I think to correct to that term, you in fact say you bounced ideas off them.
Sure.
Looking back in hindsight now, 3.5 months after we did the first 6 tapes, do you think that was the best way to go?
Well, the best way to go was the one I did go, where I made my own judgments. And as I've always said, as I've said many times, I'm always prepared to listen to other people. I'm always prepared to listen to people who are, well, I think, intelligent people, able people. And there weren't very many people with whom I came in contact daily, on a daily basis, that I related to in relation to their attitudes on issues that came up. I had some key top officers who were very, very well, intelligent people and very able to, and were prepared to give a judgment.
You didn't only use those people, did you? I mean, you really did use people that were outside of government.
I don't know that I use that to any degree at all. I related mainly, generally, and more times than not, to people, a few people around me who were related to and who were fully aware, informed of the circumstances. But there were other people outside, yes, where if I wanted information on certain people, if, for example, Sir Edward Lyons is often quoted, I would ask him a question or two occasionally. But again, just because of his wide experience, his wide background and his strong support for the National Party and for myself, he was a man who was able to give a pretty accurate judgment on many issues, and he did. But apart from that...
Let me give you an example, Sir Joh. I'm a person who you like to bounce ideas off of, for example.
Yes.
I have a particular project that I want to occur, to happen.
Yes.
I know you're the man in power. I know you can make it happen for me. You're a decision maker. So therefore, I place myself in a position whereby I get eventually you to bring the subject up. Now, surely, if I'm smart enough, I can very easily suggest to you, through my closeness with you, what I want you to do, without you, in fact, necessarily directly knowing I'm doing it. Now, I'm not suggesting you're a fool. I know you're not that.
I'd soon wake up to it if you're doing that. And as I've said at different times during the days of the Commission, it never cut any ice with me. People who tried to do that never cut any ice with me at all. Once it became obvious, which it would very quickly, because I've knocked around most of my life. I've been in the contracting business for 20-odd years before I got in.
But you trust people.
I do trust people, but I also sum them up, and I also, their record and their association with me, sooner or later, we get to know what they are. But all those days, I've got a pretty good sense of the type of people or person you are and others are. And we try and do, as you said, get the very best people to do the jobs that we did.
Looking back now on the people you've trusted and the people now as they are now, are there any people you wouldn't trust now that you did trust before?
No, I would say if I went down the same road, I would do the same things as we did in those days, because all the evidence, all the indications were, whether you go into the police area or not, the indications were that we got the top men, the men with the highest qualification, the best record. And even Mr. Whitrod confirmed that in 3 places that at times that I, in relation to the Commissioner Lewis, which I placed before the Commission the last day I was in there. I think evidence they were a little surprised to get, judging by the reaction, where Mr. Whitrod praised people that today are being ridiculed and condemned in his day. So you can see it wasn't easy, well, even for him who lived with them and worked with them, to make the judgment that he did make at that time and that I made and others made.
If I was a department head and I came to you as Premier and you sought my advice on something that perhaps was an issue or a potential issue of the day, how would you approach my advice? Would you just accept it carte blanche because I'm the head of a department or a minister? Or would you have a check and a balance to ensure what I'm telling you was indeed correct?
Well, I would soon work out whether the advice you gave me, I'd soon sum up the advice you gave me, whether it was worth bothering about or whether it was worth checking or whether it was worth following. I had, because of my long years in politics, my long years associated with the government and so on, I had a very, very overall wide experience. And this is what the present government leaders lack, particularly the leader. He hasn't the background, he hasn't the experience, and he hasn't the knowledge that I had because of my long, long years. I gave, as I said, 41 long years, over half of my life, with a tremendous enthusiasm, a tremendous dedication to the state and to its people. And I lived and worked and talked politics and worked for people. And so that gave me the basis, the background that was needed to do the job that I did do and achieve with a very, very outstanding degree of success.
Last question.
Yes.
In hindsight,
Yes.
would you change anything now that you've seen what has happened?
Well, that's a very interesting one. That's a very interesting question. There are one or two areas I would have changed and would have been different. There are. But it's at a fairly high level, and I wouldn't therefore mention it here tonight. I'd like to, but I can't.
Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.